You're listening to the Wolverine and the Warthog, Chronicles of the Wild podcast. Two hunters from opposite ends of the earth, united by instinct, driven by the wild. These are our stories. Welcome back, guys, to the Wolverine and the Warthog. We have a very special guest today, our buddy Cody Dyce. Welcome, Cody. Thanks for coming on.
Glad to be here. It's an honor.
Yeah. We are appropriately doing this one in front of the east wall with all the big mule deer behind us because this is part 2 of the Highcountry Mule Deer series of the September is Coming. So once again, we're hoping to do a nice series that kind of informs people hunting deer and hunting elk this fall on different aspects that they might not think about. So we're very excited to be bringing you part 2, especially me as I try to pick some info out of Cody here. I've probably known Cody now, I don't know, 15 years probably.
I'd say that's fair,
Yeah, long time. Cody's one of the best deer hunters I know, and it is truly an honor to have him on here. So really excited to get into the weeds.
Let's do it.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun for sure. Yeah. What I don't know a whole lot is your childhood, really.
Yeah.
I don't know much about kind of how you got started with things, and so let's start there.
That's great. You know, I mean, it's something that's very special to me and that I'm proud of that I think most people don't know. We just, you know how it is. We're in the here and now often. There's enough to talk about in the here and now that we kind of lose track of where who people are and where they come from. And for me, I'm proud to say that I'm from Pierre, South Dakota, and I grew up there not realizing what it was until I left. And so it's similar to Gunnison and is kind of a sportsman's paradise. I grew up on the Missouri River. And so it's East-West River. East River is ag, and West River is like ranching, predominantly. It's a mix on both sides, but waterfowl, upland birds, big game, fishing, all world class. And I grew up in a culture of people that was tradition there.
Yeah.
And so people didn't really make one way or the other. It was kind of prevalent in the community, in the culture, and it was just part of life. And so I had a lot of tremendous experiences growing up in that environment, and that helped shape who and what I am today. And so I'm very thankful for it. But tons of hunting and fishing opportunities and quality, and then that being a part of a culture like that, people rub off on you. You have your family's traditions, and then you get in the mix of everybody else's, and that kind of builds and shapes kind of who you are and how you see things. And so I feel fortunate for that. And I'll tell you, for me, mule deer has kind of always been my thing, and that started. And I grew up. My folks built a house when town was kind of expanding up above the river. I grew up right alongside the river when I was young, and then my folks built a house, and it was like river hills from my folks' house, and it was all city limits, but it was, I want to say several thousand acres of just rolling prairie hills, and that's where we ran around and trapped and shot BB guns and built forts and all of that, and it was a mule deer sanctuary.
Okay.
Mule deer did not typically grow very big in my era of growing up hunting in South Dakota because they were kind of sought after as just a species to target. It was like a specialty thing because it's a whitetail prevalent area. And so the unique thing about where I got to go stomp around as a kid is it grew big mule deer. And they fascinated me, and they were ghosts. But I always loved mule deer because they, when they were around, it was like a sense of security, and they're on point, and they got used to us as kids. You kind of knew the herd and all this. And so that's what really kind of shaped me to who I am now. I realize now it. I didn't realize that then, but over the years, I think back to kind of who I am and what influenced me. That was probably something that influenced me more than I ever would have thought. But it was just this. I just loved being around mule deer, even though I lived in a whitetail dominant landscape.
Smart
and so.
man.
Yeah, and so it was really cool. So that was childhood, and then I got to hunt, and we hunted a ranch down on the White River in South Dakota, which is, at the time, the biggest scored typical whitetail ever. The state record typical was shot on the ranch that we hunted.
Dang.
And it was awesome. And the funny thing is, the rancher that we were friends with, we had this traditional hunt. We'd go down there every year, and it was my dad and his best friend, and then us
So like
kids,
a legit
and then the rancher.
Deer camp.
It's a legit deer camp.
Yeah.
And, we hunted whitetails, which was mostly all drives,
Okay.
But Jim, the ranch owner, he would always tell these stories of these ghostly mule deer. And that's what I was just like, I want to go hunt one of them.
Yeah.
I want to hunt that one. And we never really did, because the whitetail, there was deer all over, and it was river bottom and huge cottonwood stands and ag fields in the bottom, and there was just deer everywhere.
And when you
And you-
mean, sorry, go ahead.
You're referring to whitetail primarily everywhere.
Yeah.
And the mule deer were kind of mixed in here and there.
Here and there. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And you mean specialty thing as far as like what it took to draw? Like, was there a draw system or?
Yeah, that's a good question. You had to draw a mule deer tag.
Okay.
You could get an any deer tag or a whitetail, and if you got an any deer tag, a lot of people would choose to go for a mule deer depending
Gotcha.
on the property they were hunting. And they're more prevalent West River than they are East River.
Gotcha.
There's mule deer on both sides of the river, but that's kind of the extent of their range is East River, South Dakota. They come out a little from the river, and then there's no more mule deer east of there, as you get towards Minnesota and Iowa and all of that. And so it was kind
like
of
their eastern edge.
It was their eastern edge.
Yeah.
And we hunted predominantly West River, but along the lake there was a lot of mule deer, and then kind of where I was talking around town there, some big mule deer. And so, yeah, go ahead.
did you feel like when you're in that, the way you're describing it and what you said before was something like, almost like you don't know what you have while you're living it, right?
Yeah.
Until you think back on it. When you were young like that, obviously they were a bit more elusive, and not as many of them. Did you know at the time that you had a greater interest in them? Maybe you don't. I'm making the assumption you have a greater interest in mule deer, or was it later on in your growing up and hunting career that you kind of got that
It was from childhood. The first deer I ever shot was a mule deer.
Oh, no kidding.
And that was by choice.
Because my next
it
question
was a forky.
was gonna be what was the mule deer moment you had that was like, these are something I'm going to be intrigued with my whole life.
Well, and I'll build on this a little bit. Part of what shaped that too, I feel like I could just carry on about. We could do this whole podcast on the gift of the life that my dad kind of set forth for me. Just being in that place and the opportunities, and then friends and relationships that all shaped that. But
Yeah, for sure.
two different things that really kind of amplified that for me was when I was a kid. It was the elusiveness of the big bucks when I was a kid. That we spent so much time out there, but it's like when you saw them, they were a different deer. How you like a big mature buck or something. So you're looking at a different deer. And it would act different, and always you could tell he didn't want to see you. And it was very seldom that we saw him, but there was just something that triggered something in me about that. I understand that now. I don't think I understood that then. But two different people I'd say in my dad's circle. One guy was one of his good friends, his coyote hunting partner forever. My dad was a big coyote hunter and tournament hunter and all that. And he had gone to school in Denver and then found a place to elk and deer hunt over towards Glenwood Basalt area. And he had shot some big mule deer. And not like this kind of big, but big for
Nice.
what we were used to. And I don't even remember what they are. If they were $170 or if they were $180, they weren't humongous, you know. But it was just like, oh yeah, that. And then there was another guy that was in my dad's circle, but he lived next to my grandmother, and he was a taxidermist, but he was a hardcore deer guy. His name is Jim Halleck. He's passed, but just one of those guys that's set apart different. And go over there and look in his shop, and he had an outfitting business in Colorado, and he was into big mule deer, and he would tell these stories of these ghosts and stuff, and that just, all those things built.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is my thing. Like, there's whitetails everywhere. There's all flavors of hunters. You know, and there's people that are shooting all different sizes of bucks. You know, like my dad, the year I was born, shot a big double drop tine whitetail. You know, I mean, so I grew up with whitetail heads in the house, big deer. I grew up a trophy hunter. My dad was a trophy hunter, and you know, at a very young age, I understood that I could be proficient as a hunter, and so like stepping up that game a little bit made it a little more interesting. Ironically, on the ranch that we hunted whitetails, everybody there shot a big whitetail, 160 or better at some point, and I was the only one who never got a big deer.
It's because you liked those mule deer. That was your punishment.
Well, it wasn't that. I like shooting stuff. At that point in time.
But that was your punishment for liking mule deer better.
I feel like it might have been, and so that happened, and then you know, so that kind of shaped me. And I just had that affliction for them because, you know, the other part, I've always been a guy that, I don't know about intentionally, but I gravitate towards what's less popular. And whatever that was, if it was trends in school as we were growing up or whatever, what you wear or just, you know, music that you listen to, I just had a curiosity for the things that were less popular, and mule deer were. Particular at that time. But I also, one thing that I know now is that I was always fascinated by mule deer hunters because they were a different breed, and I liked that too. And so all those things, I think, kind of fed into that. And then I believe it was 95, I think, was my first trip to Colorado with my dad down to that.
And how old were you then?
I think I was 15. Okay. And we came to Colorado. It was a big group of guys. We had horses, the whole deal. We knew where we were going, all this. We pull into Glenwood, and we're buying tags, and my dad said, you can get a mule deer or an elk tag. I was like, no brainer.
Yeah.
I want a mule deer tag. And so we got packed in, and we did all of our stuff. And the first morning, we're sitting on this ridge. I just can envision it just perfectly. Just the whole layout and the way it rolled down this open ridge and all of this. The first morning, these two bucks come, and they were just boxy. I don't know if they were 150s or if they were 175 bucks. They weren't humongous, but they came out. My dad's like, okay, you want to shoot? And they're like 200 yards, something that I could do no problem. And I was just like, no, I don't want to kill them. And that's something that I guess the order of what we're going to talk about. But I'll tell you one thing about me. As much as I like mule deer hunting, and I'll make a point of this. So there's a difference between hunting and killing. And for me, I do kill. I get pumped up about it. I get excited when I have a tag, but I would much rather see them alive than dead any day. And that moment gave me that opportunity, and it was kind of a thing in me where it's like, I just want to see them. I don't want to kill them. I
didn't want it to end almost.
I didn't want it to end. Yeah. And there was a part of me that was like, I don't want to crack the first round and screw up the, you know, I was just with a bunch of guys who were elk hunting.
Yeah.
And I had a mule deer tag. And so there was all those factors, but not shooting and letting them walk made a permanent impression too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so that fueled that, and then I took off. I know my dad was all bent out of shape because he's like, we saw a guy clear up there on the ridge. And I was like, that was me. He's like, you went clear up there? And I was like, yeah. And I just, this wanderlust thing came about. and I knew from some of the mule deer stories that my dad's buddy Daryl was his name, and had told me, and it was just like, yeah, I want to see it. And we were hunting on the edge of 44. But this is great country. That red rock stuff on the south side of the ridge there.
Yeah.
But anyways, that whole experience just kind of opened my mind. And so then at about that, shortly thereafter, the ranch that we hunted was bought by a guy from Minneapolis to hunt.
The one in Basalt, or the one in...
The one in South Dakota on the
gotcha.
White
Okay.
River. Yeah, so I'm kind of bouncing all over here, but I want to be a little bit succinct so I don't get carried away. But anyways, and commercial hunting was becoming really prevalent in South Dakota at that time.
Like leasing or
the
outfitting?
pheasants, the outfitting, all that. Ted Turner bought all that country south of town. And so it was like places were drying up to go, and the public was getting flooded. And I went to school at South Dakota State my first year for wildlife fisheries management. Second day of class, my advisor is the professor of this 180 huge lecture 101 class, and he comes out and he says, out of all of you, if you all graduate same day, 2 of you are going to get a job. One's going to be a minority and one's going to be a woman. The rest of you are going to be clawing your way to the top unless you want to continue your education and get a master's degree. And I bailed. I bailed on my lifelong childhood dream of becoming a biologist. And I decided to change the course of my life. And so hunting was still important to me, but it kind of broke my spirit. The commercial stuff, you couldn't just knock on a door, and you could, and you still can. But that was going away, and we lost our place, and it was like, what am I here for? And at that point in time, I moved to Missoula, Montana, and I got into backpacking and climbing and that kind of stuff. And I kind of fell out of hunting for a while. And then I moved to Leadville and went to Colorado Mountain College there for outdoor recreation. And so I wanted to get a tag right away, and I could, and I did, and I could, because that was when, like, that unit that I was hunting was undersubscribed. You know, there'd be 200 leftover buck tags, and so I got a buck tag, and I killed my first Colorado deer in 1999.
Okay.
And had a great hunt. It's a beautiful buck. It was like a dream come true, and then that really
You were
locked
studying
it in.
at the time?
Yeah, I was going to college for outdoor rec at CMC, Colorado Mountain College, and that's when it all kind of came back. Montana, I hunted down in the Bitterroots and a little bit up in the on the edge of the Bob Marshall, and I was not successful. It was more wandering around with a rifle. You know, I just really didn't know what I was doing at all, and so coming back there kind of started things with the hunting. And so I started going over there and hunting mule deer and elk. I was more successful with elk. It was just a really elky spot with deer, you know, but I wanted to target the deer. And there wasn't big bucks, but there were mature deer with, you know, that didn't get real big. And so I did that. And then, let's see, I lived there for a couple of years. I went to Alaska, and the hunting was just kind of a side thing. And then after I finished my education there, I had done my internship in Seward, and actually got together with a gal that I went to high school with up there, and we decided we were going to move to Gunnison. And so I moved to Gunnison.
Why Gunnison?
Well, that's a good question. And so the reason Gunnison is she could continue her education because she bailed on school, and then I could continue the outdoor rec program from a 2-year associate's to a bachelor's here. Everything transferred over smooth, and so that was kind of something they encourage there at CMC. If you want to take this further, is come to Western. And so we did that, and so the idea was for me to go back. She was going to go back to school. She went back to school. I was going to work a little bit, and then go back to school.
Like, do they have mule deer there?
I did not. No, oblivious. So no, check this out. This is a turning point.
Fun full circle.
It was. I was totally oblivious. That wasn't on my mind. I wanted to climb mountains for a living. I wanted to ice climb. That was my emphasis. And I was just really kind of sold. In that era of my life, you know, that's where the trend was. It was cool. It was, you know, ego fueler and all that. And so I really thought that's what I wanted to do. And I just kind of let hunting just kind of drift away a little bit. And not completely, but it just wasn't a priority to me. And so the interesting thing is I came here, and that was 2001, and I couldn't find work. It was the dangest thing. I would call contractors, like, I'll sweep a floor, whatever. I got tons of different experience growing up in a trades family and all this, and I couldn't find work. So I'd come in, I'd go to the job force every day, and I'd look at their job board and talk, and there was one insulating job, and I just wouldn't take it. And so I had money because I had worked for my dad to kind of build a little nest egg to get here. And so I had a little freedom and flexibility. And when I moved here, I moved to Ohio City. I didn't move to Gunnison. I got a place in Ohio City. And so driving back and forth, I noticed the deer. You know, they were wintering. I came in January for context. So the deer were down and all that. And I was like, I got nothing else to do today. I'm just going to take one of these roads. And I would like to think that one of the roads east of town was where I first went. And there was just deer everywhere. And I was just like, whoa, okay. This is a freaking paradise, and I'm seeing all shapes and sizes of bucks, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I'd tell my dad, I'm like, send me he had one of the 8mm handy cams, remember those? And I was like, you got to send me this so I can show you what I'm seeing, you know, well before cell phones and all that. I'm like, you won't believe this. I mean, there's big bucks, little bucks, there's just deer everywhere, hundreds of deer. And so he sends that down, and I started filming some specific bucks. And one day I'd went out, and this is over, you know, a course of maybe, I don't know, we'll say 6 weeks. I'm kind of getting into this thing, you know, like I wouldn't rather be doing anything else but driving around all day looking at all these deer. This is amazing. And I found this really wide buck, and I just really loved him. And so one day I decided, I never got out. You didn't have to, you know. You drive around all day and it's deer, 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 deer. And I found this white buck, and I couldn't find him where he was at. And I'm like, he's just got to be over the hill. And I walked up this hill, and that's like back, you know, I know they say we have more deer now than we did then, and whatever. But you saw a lot more deer on the winter range then. And there's just trails everywhere. And so I'm walking on this trail to go see if I can get on a ridge to see this buck. And I see this thing sticking out of the snow. And I'm like, oh, that's an antler. Oh my gosh. All these antlers are going to be laying on the ground. Holy cow, what have I walked into? And I pulled that thing, it was packed in the snow, and I still have the antler, and it was a chalk. But I was just like, the light bulb went on, and I was like, oh my gosh, these antlers. And so I totally dumbed into it. I mean, honest, no intention, mule deer was not what I was thinking about. And then it changed my life. That was a turning point in my life. Yeah, and so I then figured it out, and then the shed thing happened, and then I was like, I know where that buck is every single day. Yeah. And I picked up big sets of antlers, and I was just like, oh my gosh.
And Cody I just want to point out, he is literally has always done it for the love of the game. He has never sold me an antler, not 2-point, not he's got them freaking piled up in his man cave. I've been in there, and so I mean, truly for the love of it, which is what.
Yeah, for sure. It's a fun. The whole antler thing's foreign to me, right? Because coming from South Africa, it's like you don't get that part of the. Yeah. I would never even consider that. Like, well, even the whole like, I love seeing the deer and watching them. And then all of a sudden being like, I get a souvenir out of this. Yeah. Like, I literally get a part of this deer. Yeah. and then you've kind of built a relationship with
Totally.
an actual object, you know, and
It's not like an
whereas
Impala.
in South Africa, it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, you might see the same thing again every year or something,
Right.
but yeah, so that's, I never really considered
Yeah,
that.
you
It's
get to
kind
take
I
like
mean,
a
you guys
piece.
are-
Yeah, and that's, I didn't even
So-
think about it because it's like second nature.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You don't know
Like,
any different.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing growing up in South Dakota. Sheds were not something that, deer everywhere. And it was a prize. I think I still have like 3 or 4 sheds that I ever picked up in my whole childhood, and they were prizes that I still have. They were a
Yeah.
prize then. And then I realized there's hundreds of them out here.
Yeah.
And every one was special. And until, and then it became, I mean, I don't want to sound foolish, but once I figured it out, I was selective harvest because in those days you couldn't carry out what you found in a day, and so then it became
So
like
disgusting.
you were picking.
Yeah.
You start to build a
library in your head. And
kind of you calibrate what's
What's worth?
cooler,
Yeah.
and what's worth breaking your back to put
Yeah.
one
Well,
more
I remember
on.
my dad, like he would max himself at 50 sheds is what he'd do.
Yeah.
So if he found the 51st and it was a good one,
And then you cull.
right.
Yeah.
And he'd make sure that he had 50 in his pack and like start pulling the other ones out. And I remember seeing pictures and they're just brown sheds, just loaded up, freaking porcupine back sticking off this far,
Yeah.
and it's like,
Yeah, crazy,
It is,
crazy.
yeah.
And browns and whites and chalks and, I mean, for years I would just leave stuff and come back and, they'd always be there. And then, you got to targeting deer and, picking up multiple years off the same deer and some of them moving and some of them, I've got deer, multiple years of sheds off a deer that I would say was in 150-yard
totally.
patch.
Yeah.
Like 3-4 years off the same deer, the same 150-yard patch, and then some of them miles away.
Which-
Same deer.
Which is very telling for like deer behavior. Like this is another part of these research tools of researching mule deer. Like you learned a lot about mule deer
so
just
much.
driving around and picking up antlers. You
Yeah.
learned about
So-
behavior and different tendencies and different even personalities between these.
Absolutely,
deer.
100%. And that, I'll tell you, the one thing that I've learned then that is correlated to now is that there's no straightforward way that it works. It is they're all different, and so it's like I don't think you can boil down deer behavior to a
Which
science.
is what
You can
makes
to a degree.
the pursuit fun. You know what I mean? Is
absolutely,
because
100%.
you'll never know everything.
Yeah,
Never.
yeah.
You can get good and you can get efficient, but it's something that you just keep building on and keep learning your entire lifetime, which is why
But
we
it
do
is
and why we
very,
love it.
it is interesting info though, because again, having not grown up doing that, and I've thought about this and I've chatted to I'm just not a keen shed hunter, but it's fascinated me in the sense of like when someone's like, hey, I found this buck now for the 4th year in the row, or like a big bull, like my mind's thinking of it from like a hunting perspective. I'm like, okay, it's fascinating that deer survived our current hunting. Like that alone is
Yeah.
telling to me. It's like, there's stuff I don't know about these elk, because how could something that's been a shooter for 5 years survive all 5 seasons for, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, what are they doing? What do
Yeah.
they know? It's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
You know,
yeah,
and so
absolutely.
you guys have accumulated that knowledge, which, like you said, it doesn't give you the pinpoint,
No.
and make things easy, but it is quite a lot of pieces of a puzzle that people just wouldn't know otherwise.
Absolutely.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
It is, and I'll tell you, to speak to the mule deer bias thing, the one thing that has kept me fascinated about mule deer is that there's white-tailed deer and there's elk, are popular in that realm. And I stir people up all the time with this, is that they're so much easier to hunt elk and whitetails because they leave sign and they're consistent. But mule deer, with some exceptions to different environments, their consistency is not always there. And sometimes it is, but it's not as obvious as the other species, in my experience. And I'm not saying that means anything, but in my experience, the other two popular species are not as unpredictable as mule deer are. Even though I can talk about, the same deer came back to that same, how he
Right.
got there, who knows, and how he survived all that. There's a deer that I picked up a few years ago. I've got 5 years of his sheds, and that deer, to my knowledge, was only seen by one human being alive.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
and
crazy,
he
man. It's
lived
fascinating.
where everyone could see him. And then I'm pretty sure I found him lying killed without his antlers. And I'm guessing based on the antlers, his growth, and just kind of the story behind him, that he was probably 9 or 10, and he lived that long. And he was one that I would be surprised if anybody would pass,
Yeah.
Yeah, at probably even 5 years old. He was probably killable for half a
interesting,
decade.
the deer was started out, he was a 180s typical, probably 28-inch wide, and he finished out as a big freak non-typical. But if I didn't know him as well as I did, I would have never guessed that.
Like if you'd have found the first year and then you would have found the last year, you would have never associated those two together.
Never.
Yeah.
But anyway, so all that has fueled the fascination and interest in mule deer for me. And so I guess that would be a short version of the backstory, and then it all kind of escalated from there. It was a few years. And so I don't remember, the high country, it was like where we hunted over by Glenwood, wasn't really high country, but it was high timber, classic elk country that had deer in it. But, the Holy Cross was right there, all that high country, and I just kept thinking about it. And I was familiar with Eastman's. My dad, the tour came through, and I remember the North
In South
American
Dakota?
Hunters tour and all that. And my dad, I'm thinking of stuff that I forgot, but my dad used to, he had this thing, you could go to the state library, because where I grew up in Pierre was the capital. And we had a public library, and then we had the state library. And at the state library, they had the old Gordon Eastman films. And my dad introduced me to those. And in fact, I want to think that there used to be this deal, we'd go in the bottom of the cop shop, I think, and they would play it for, a select group. Not a hand-picked, but, whoever wanted to come and watch these old Gordon Eastman winter range videos. And that was another thing. I can't think of all the things that inspired me, but that was like, I was just like, yeah. And then, of course, Mike came about then, and the high country mule deer, and that intrigued me. And so I was drawn a little higher. And of course, we've got infinite country. And so, it became a thing for me in that time where that was my life. I just followed the deer up and down all year. Throughout the years until 07, 08. Changed another turning point in my life. That wrecked me. But so I started going to the high country. That's where I wanted. It was what I liked about that, coming from the plains. I grew up behind a spotting scope. I quit sports in like 9th grade, and I just hunted and fished. And I just loved driving around and looking at deer. And I didn't care what species or where I was at, if I was looking at private or public. I didn't care about hunting them or, targeting a deer or anything. I just love looking at deer. I still do to this day. Everywhere I go, I love looking at deer. I don't care where I'm at. It's just me.
Well, I remember, I think it's important to note, I remember us having a conversation similar to this, and you just said, mule deer remind me of home. Like basically your
time.
two main homes that you had, South Dakota and here, like that's like a home cooked mama's meal. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Like it just is like gives you this warm feeling.
It's a warm blankie for sure. Yeah. And that's something that I realized more as I've matured and gotten older, and it was like, oh wow, this is amazing how this culminated. And I didn't even realize that this was going to get to this point. But so anyways, I like the high country because I could glass. It's like you got all this beautiful habitat between winter range and summer range, which is summer range and permanent range for some deer. But it's like, where do you start and stop? You come to the alpine tundra, and they're visible and it's concentrated. And so naturally I gravitated to that because you could up your odds of what you saw in a day. Sitting up there above timberline, and the whole mountain climbing thing, so it's like climb a peak and bring the spotting scope, and
Dual
double
purpose,
down, and so I started that, and had some buddies come and hunt elk, and we loved watching the deer, and that's when I started hunting 43, and you could get maybe you still can, archery tags as a leftover, and I was just absolutely poor at it, but I could find deer. But killing them with my bow at that point in time, was like, there's so much I learned in my failure. And I'll say kudos to Hunter Enlow on the podcast. I loved his humility and talking about how much failure he's had or lack of success, however you want to put it. But I love that, and that's one thing that I like to tell people all the time. Obviously people are familiar with my interest in deer hunting and all that just because of what I've done over the years. But the one thing that I can't stress enough is how many days that no sheds, no deer, no big bucks.
I know, it's easy to...
my days way, my days of low success in whatever pursuit way outnumber the days of success or, hitting those marks that that a lot of people want to achieve. And so I'll say that what I've obtained for knowledge and experience over time has probably come more from lack of success than success itself.
The best way to learn.
And I think it is important to point out, because it is easy to reminisce on the cherry on top always, right? Because why wouldn't you, right? But because no one wants to hear about the countless times you went out and never saw anything, or weren't successful in it and stuff like that.
But it was pretty mind-blowing with Hunter to hear. Hunter is a straight-up killer, and my assumption of Hunter was he just came here from North Carolina and he just started stacking stuff, stacking big fish, stacking big deer. No. He struggled for a long time. That was when he was I didn't kill a coyote for 5 years. I'm and it's
pretty crazy to think that, thinking about how successful he actually is now.
But he learned. He messed up enough to learn what to do and what not to do. And learning what not to do is far more important than learning what to do.
Yeah, and having the humility to accept it.
Absolutely.
I think that's the thing. We've gravitated towards kind of a performance culture in the hunting or sports person world, I feel like. And not that's a broad statement. It's not everybody. There's a whole spectrum of people. But I think what we see more,
it's just instant gratification. Plus what we show is the best bits. It's, again, the cherry on top. You know, it's so for someone new coming into it, they may get that misconception a little bit, which is part of our industry now, whether we like it or not. Let's be totally honest, it is the way it is, you know. And so it's an interesting one for sure. I know you were getting to the 2007 2008 event, so I won't detract you from that too much. At any point as you kind of got into this, obviously you're going about your daily life and everything here. When did you dabble with any guiding? That's one of my funnest stories. And so what happened is any minute that I could get, I just wanted to go look at mule deer, and so it didn't matter what kind of deer. Except for I love fishing mountain streams. May till the end of June with a fly rod. That is another thing that I really, really love. And so I would kind of take a break because they're coming up. They're coming, shed season, you're wore out, you're done with it. You've got your fill, it's warming up. It's like I would be way done by the time we can start now.
Exactly.
Starting March 15th then and pounding it until the end of April and
I was gonna say that was when I ended it. I was as soon as it started getting real ticky and real hot, it's I'm out. Now we got to start at that point.
So I would just run that cycle. But what happened is I was out, and I want to think that it was a third season, and living in Ohio City, I didn't have to go far to find deer, and I was out one day, and I don't think it matters. I was in Alder Creek, and And I was just watching deer and watching big deer get killed and just whatever, and just kind of in awe. And it's just like, just taking it all in. It was just all spectacular all the time. I mean, that was when there was deer clear down the North Parland Flats. I mean, you could hit the top of the hill, above Field's place, and you were in deer. And that was all the way to Miller's cabin, And so I was over, I actually crossed, and I was over in Big Gulch, and saw these guys on horses, and I was just like, oh, well, that's probably a cool way to hunt, even though there's trucks everywhere. That was when four-wheelers weren't even that prevalent. And but guys everywhere, and these guys are riding on horseback, kind of whatever. And so I went up, looking over Alder, just at a good glassing spot there, and I heard a shot, and I was like, oh, and I looked over there, and I could see those guys on the horses. I'm like, I want to get in on the action, like I want to go see what they got. And so I walked over there, and they weren't that far from where I was parked, and it's freaking Nelson. John Nelson, who I don't know who this guy is, but it's Nelson. And so I talked to him, and I said, nice buck and all this, and like, oh, this is so awesome, and how can I help? And they're like, well, John's like, well, we got to ride back and get to camp, and then we'll take this buck into town to the taxidermist. I was like, well, I would be more than happy to load him up in my truck and take it to town or whatever, if that's something that would be helpful to you. And he's like, oh, really? I was like, yeah, you bet. And he's like, well, do you want to take the hunter and the deer, and I'll just take the horses back, and I'll tie them up at Miller's cabin, and then I'll come meet you at the taxidermist place. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. And so it's Chip. And so he's like, yeah, he lives right there at the dump road. I was like, yeah, I know where that house. I think he just built his house and all this. And I was like, yeah, I saw that house. That's the taxidermist. Oh, all right. And so we take this buck to the taxidermist, to Chip's, and we're Nelson finally shows up, but we're just jawboning into telling the story of the hunt and just kind of getting to know each other and all this stuff. Nelson comes, and throughout the conversation, Chip goes, Nelson, here's your deer guide for next week. He's like, oh? And I'm like, he's like, well, what are you doing next week? And we were kind of slow at work then, and I was like, well, I could be available. And at that point in time, I was really anti-commercial hunting because of what had happened at home.
Yeah.
Everybody's selling out. And so I'm like, I don't like commercial hunting and guides and all that. I still don't, even though I've told your dad that many times.
Oh, yeah.
So anyways, so Nelson's like, you want a guy to hunt? And so that's how I got into the guiding. Okay. Another dumb, just honest thing.
Fell in.
Yeah, I was curious, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not something you pursued. I was similar in the sense as well. I didn't like that. There was like a connotation I had with it that I also just had this like, I don't want to mix like my passion with my work type. That was also a reservation, but ultimately you fall into it anyway to some degree, which is kind of actually fun, to have had your interest in it, but then not necessarily have gone to pursue that, just like a door opened,
And John Nelson is a legend. I mean,
Oh man, and I wish I could carry on. I'll spare you guys that stuff of the whole experience.
Yeah.
So my first guided hunt was epic. I love a couple beers in me, and I tell that story.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a great one. But anyways, so the thing about that with mixing like your passion and all that, and this is the same that was true all the way through my career, was I got to hunt tags that I would never draw.
Sure.
I wanted to hunt.
Get experiences that you valued anyway. I know that is the upside for sure.
Yeah. These are tags that I'm never going to get.
Yeah.
This is how I told people a lot throughout my career when I was sharing, what do? You guide and all this. And I said, I guide, but here's the deal. I go on multiple once in a lifetime hunts a year. These people get to do this once in their life, and this is what I get to be a part of.
Yeah.
And so I talk about an honor, I never took it lightly that I was experiencing something that was just what I did here at home, in home Gunnison, that someone's only going to get to experience one time for 5 or 7 days in their life. There is a lot of weight there. And that was a whole process too. But what an honor, ultimately. And what kept me in it was that I got to have an experience that I wouldn't otherwise. At that point in time, my interest had started to brew in the high country, and I'd get those archery tags. I was awful at it at that point in time, and it was just an exercise of, taking the bow for a walk, basically. I had a lot of awesome close encounters and missed shots and all that stuff, but regardless, what I wanted to do, I'm like, I want to kill a big buck in the high country. I'm getting a high country rifle tag, like I'm not a fool and I'm not too proud. Like, I don't care. I want to shoot one up here.
Yeah.
And so I started saving for 43 high country.
Okay.
And that was my,
So they've done that hunt a while. I've actually wondered how long they've been doing that early rifle hunt.
It's been, I'll tell you, it's been a long time because I met these guys in 43 that hunted over there every year, and they were old boys, like true blue, like old mule deer hunters, man. Just those guys there's not many of those guys anymore.
Yeah.
And I say that respectfully. There's hardcore mule deer hunters, but not like the ones that came out of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
That was a different breed, and those guys were it. And man, the stories. But anyway, so I decided I wanted to do that. In the meantime, so backtrack or get muddy. I worked for Nelson for a few years, had some great experiences, but Nelson is an elk camp. I was, this is crazy now thinking about it, but Nelson's camp was in the wilderness. And so I would literally ride out of camp in the dark, go to the pickup, hunt all day, and then come back, saddle the horses back up, and ride into camp every single night from Miller's cabin. It was crazy. And that's how we deer hunted. And so in that time period, let's see, I'm bouncing around, and sorry if I lose you or if this is too much.
Fine.
But
Yeah, you're good.
in, I want to say 2003, before I was guiding, I had my dad down for a muzzleloader elk hunt and in 55, and we were in the high country where I'd known some elk were and all this, and one of my favorite places on earth to this day will be for the rest of my life. But we were up in there, and I had found these great big bucks, and I was like, we'll go in there to look at the elk tonight, so you kind of know the program, but I want you to see these deer. And so we saw them and we watched them that night, and one was like a 200-inch deer and the other was like this big 190, and there's another, like, I don't know what he was, 170s buck or something. But to me, to this day, 170 buck is a big buck to me. I don't care what anybody says, age, all that. Like this deer right here is that's probably, he's probably 180, but without the cheaters, he's probably 170 buck.
Yeah.
It's a big deer. I don't care.
Yeah. Sure.
And so, anyways, it was awesome. My dad gets ahead of me, and I see him out at the trail or at the road, and he's talking to these people. And right away, and I come from kind of tight knit, like you don't tell people anything, you don't talk to people, you're friendly if you do. But for me, I'm a coyote. I have been, and I still am. And so I like to be elusive. And so my dad's talking to these guys, and I'm just like, you got to be kidding me. So go out there, and my dad's there. And at that time, and for a long time, I always carried my spotting scope with a rifle sling. And I just always had it slung, And I had my scope on, and I'm like, these guys are seeing us and all this. Well, it turns out, and I didn't know at the time, but I do know now, it was Nick Ray and Steve Greary. And they were getting ready to hunt that buck that they'd found. And so I was like, oh, okay, sweet. We're going to sit back and watch. These elk aren't going anywhere. We're going to watch this thing go to
muzzleloader tag?
Muzzleloader
for Nick?
tag. For Steve.
Okay, for Steve.
Yeah.
And just to give this some context here, Steve is the owner of Lazy F Bar Outfitters, which both of us guided for Steve. Cody did for a long time. So okay.
I don't remember what it was. I think I did 17 years with Steve or something like that. But anyways, so one of my best friends, great human being. But anyway, so I meet these guys, and they're going to go kill this deer, and it's like, we got the ultimate, we got the elk tag, like they're going to do their thing. Nobody up there, back in those days, there was not many people around, and so we watch it, and it's a total folly. And Steve shoots at the buck and misses it and runs it off, and it's a story that we reminisce on now, but it was just kind of funny. And so we went back onto elk hunting and all that, and I didn't know anything about those guys being outfitters, nothing, whatever. And so I was dating a gal whose sister was helped with trail rides up there at the ranch. And so one time Nick came over because he was friends because they worked together, and we started talking. And I'm like, you're that guy. I met you before. And then so Nick tells Steve about me, and that's that guy we met. And he's like, oh my gosh, we got to meet. And so at that point in time, it was a good transition for me to go to Nelson, because Nelson didn't like dealing with the trophy deer guys and all that. But he was Gunnison Country Outfitters, and this was the spot when, things were coming about, when we got the big bloom. I call it the wonder years, but that was all happening at the same time. Well, so then I talked to Nick, then talked to Steve, and Nelson was cool with it. He didn't want to deal with it, and that's when I started working for Steve, and things changed. And then I got involved with a super awesome crew, and then hunting high country, low country, all of that, and that was whatever it was. I'll say 17 years. I'm not a counter. But a great era of my life with an outstanding group of people and some of the best mule deer country, high to low, in the entire United States. And just what a gift. And all of it was not something that I ever aspired to do, but the cool thing for me was that the education didn't go to a waste, because the outdoor recreation leadership really helped me be a better guide, and it made for a better experience. And I think, I think people who do it, there's a whole broad rainbow of people who do that, but when you do it intentionally like this for trophy deer and all that, I think it did add to the experience, and I'm thankful looking back that too helped shape me, unintentionally, that helped shape things. And so that kind of speaks to my evolution. Now going back to deer in the landscape in Gunnison, so I remember the first year, I didn't get my years, the first year I hunted for Steve was 08.
Okay.
The year that we lost all of our deer.
The year after, or the year going into?
The season, my first season hunting with Steve was the fall after we lost all of our deer.
Gotcha.
And so it was tough. But that's where I started.
Because we figured we had it was like a 99% fawn mortality, and I don't remember what the...
Yeah.
There may be people that don't know the context of this.
That's like the progression of your experience in the Gunnison Valley, how the mule deer changed kind of through those years.
And there's something that I'd like to make a point of when I talk to people about this. And, coming into it, I know a lot of guys that came and were around that were older, and I was just even more of a pup than I am now, even though I'm not that much of a pup, but I just green and didn't know a lot. I just loved it, But I've garnered knowledge off of, that has formatted me over time. But the one thing, even though I didn't know that much then, what I was observing post, winter range, post rut and all of that was a lot of beat up, a lot of mature deer. Every doe group had a couple mature deer, or what appeared to be mature deer, dominant deer that were rutting and fighting, and then you had all your satellites and all that. It was kind of a perfect dynamic, but you could tell there was too much. And at the time, it was when Donnie Masden was still the biologist here, and I've been in the office ever since I got here. I don't have any problem with game wardens and biologists. They're not the enemy to me. And so I spent a lot of time in there, and I said to Donnie, I said, hey, you know, I think it's really great that there's all these bucks, but I think they're killing themselves. And he said, you're right, they are, and it's a problem. And I said, you know, I'm going out in the after the rut and finding dead deer, and then that are not poached, and then on the winter or on the shed hunting, I find a lot of dead, mature bucks that are shed out, and it's prevalent. You know, I mean, I would argue to this day that back in those days, based on observations, we were losing 25% of our herd every year just 'cause. And that's does, fawns, and bucks, but a lot of bucks, a lot of, you know, I got a bunch of, I got a collection of shed buck skulls that were just great big pedicles that I just kept because they were cool. You know, it's just like, I don't know what he was, but this is an old mature deer, you know.
Yeah.
That's a trophy to me.
Yeah.
You know, that's the deer's got a story that's not like any other, like they all do. But anyways, it was significant to me. But I could see that was an issue, you know, that we it's awesome to see all these bucks, but they're killing themselves. They're not going to hunters. You know, I'll be careful to say a waste, but in a sense that we have these big mature deer, but nobody's harvesting in them, with that being so popular and someone to kill a buck of a lifetime, they're just dying out here. They're killing themselves.
Yeah, just so many of them that they're overpressuring the food source. They're they're
competition for does,
for rutting and stuff like that.
Because I remember Brad saying that in the 07-08 winter. He said, did you drive out there and you'd see 8 does bedded and they got 4 inches of snow on their back. It's snowing, it's coming down. They got that fat insulating them. That snow is just sitting on top. And then he goes, you'd look over at the 2 or 3 bucks, and they are soaking wet. Like they burned through all their fat reserves. Yeah. They're soaking wet, and now they're freezing to death when it's getting negative 30 because that competition is so high.
Yeah. And so as popular as it is to have that kind of buck to doe ratio and that many mature bucks on the landscape, like I'll listen to everybody's point of view, and I respect everybody's point of view, but thinking that higher buck to doe ratios and older, a large portion of older mature bucks is what you want. I really, for the sake of the deer, if you're prioritizing the deer over our preference for hunting them and harvesting trophies, it is better to have that where we're at currently, that 35 to 40. And
I mean, that's a fair, that is a fair assessment, but of course,
we
as deer hunter, we're
absolutely 100%.
So I'm just going to add this in because there might be some people that just don't have the background of it. So Gunnison Basin, it's a unique environment. For one, it's very cold. So as far as like the lower 48 of the states go, this is one of the coldest places.
Coldest spot in the nation.
This event these guys are talking about was obviously there was always a big winter here, but there was a particular winter. When was it? 2007 through 2008.
December 2007.
That winter. What was the? Give someone some context of that. Well, how did that differ from all the other winters?
Well, in Gunnison, I believe it was 100-year record or something like that, and it was 100+ inches of snow in Gunnison.
But then the problem after that, which they can deal with the snow or the cold, was that they got that much snow, over competition for food sources and for does. Then when those clouds clear like they do, got cold for long, for months on end.
Well, and so you had the buck to doe ratio factoring into how stressed they were going into the winter. And then you had a food source that was covered up, but you also had a degraded food source from a high population of deer and bucks. And so they were concentrated onto what they traditionally used, and they were depleting that resource. And so they not only had the conditions of that winter, but they had the cumulative effect of them degrading that winter range because of their high population over that period of time leading up to that. And so it was catastrophic.
Yeah, the perfect storm is not the great word to use in that, but it was an accumulation of factors that decimated the deer population as a result. And then from a totally different perspective of that, of course, we don't know this, but it's also probable that if the population wasn't as heavy as it was and things weren't as pressured as they were, the total effect of that die-off probably would have been different. Who knows, right? Who knows? Either way, the event substantially changed the face of what did you call them? The what years?
The Wonder Years.
The Wonder Years,
Yeah.
which I've heard stories about. I'm jealous I wasn't there of that because I arrived to the end of 2008 or 2009.
Right after it happened.
So I didn't know anything.
Which is honestly kind of a blessing because you didn't get to see what that resource was. Well, now you hear the stories.
Anyway, so so we had that event, and then obviously that really changed the landscape for a lot of different things. I mean,
I think it was speculated that 50% or 60% die off. I can't remember what the agency speculated, but I would have nudged that towards a 70 or higher percent die off. So
and it is
in light of giving context to this event in this point in time, is that it eliminated over half. It factually, non-debatable what the number was beyond half, who knows, but so if you imagine this huge robust population cut in half at one winter, it changed things dramatically.
Which happens here. I mean, this happens in a lot of places in the West where we are due for another winter because basically when you look back in the history books, you're like, every 10 years, it might be 12, it might be 8, but every 10 years or so, it's like that's when something comes. And I think it's also important to note that these deer weren't all going to waste, right? There was a lot of happy hunters back in those days. Like they were still harvesting bucks. Our resource did get taken out by winter, but that's a natural effect of
It's interesting in that it's a singular event. Obviously it has reoccurred and obviously Gunnison's always had harsh winters, but if you think of other places where it's accumulates over time like a drought, right? It's like 1 year it's pretty bad, second year it's worse than the year prior, and that kind of accumulates and it kind of changes the face. This was quite a dramatic event just given it was quite short. There must have been a bit of a snowball effect, right? I mean, what happened in year 2 and year 3 after that, right? Because the whole herd dynamic changes. The way does were probably responding to that, right? Could have affected
without
their breeding cycles. And what was your observation on some of that?
Yeah, I think what happened in some places, and I experienced this in Wyoming too, is you took out populations of deer that had run migrations, had utilized different habitat regularly, like you eliminated them. And so that tradition of that
herd knowledge was
that
just
generations of fawns doing the same thing over and over, some of that was just eliminated. Boom.
Yeah.
Gone.
Yeah.
And so you saw places that were void of deer, and some of those places came back and they utilized that country. And then some of them have never had a deer since.
Totally.
That prior to, you could count on, I could go down that drainage right there in that patch of brush, there's going to be deer in there. And all of a sudden, of a place that I guaranteed every time you went in there, you could find deer. There's never been a deer there since. I feel like Ohio Creek was a place like that. I used to drive in from Ohio City to go drive up Ohio Creek in an evening just to see those freaking monsters out in the hayfield. I don't remember the last time that I saw that out there. Now, I know they exist all over, but a lot of low country deer went away. High country had some missing pieces. But it still came back. And, one of the things that I like to encourage people is that 2009, Steve opted to not, I think maybe he booked a 4th season hunter, but no other
we didn't
hunters.
Have 4th then, so it would have been
so
3rd.
Maybe not. And so Nick got a tag. A voucher, I got a voucher, and Steve got a voucher, and another guy, Bill, who worked for us, got a voucher, and we decided we were going to hunt. We all hunted really big bucks that year, and multiple. And that was the next year after. And so, you know, just like what we're seeing in Wyoming right now, I mean, this is an immediate rebound. And this is a point that I'd like to make. What the point is not about the bucks that we hunted. It's about the fact that what I think is cool and what makes places like the Wyoming range, winter range, and the Gunnison winter range, and those winters like that, the silver lining is that you so naturally select the best, the survivors.
Yeah.
What's left is the strongest, you know. And so I think that's what happened is we reduced the population, but what stayed was the dominant, you know, best genetic animals. And I'm sure that a biologist could tear me apart on that.
Yeah, I don't know
But
if I
that's your
totally buy
feel.
that in a single event like that. Just yes, to some degree.
To some degree.
It's an interesting observation. Not something
Yeah.
I actually would have even considered
Yeah.
with that.
But yeah, it was like, oh, the deer are gone. And all it did is it just shrunk the population, but we still had mature deer, and that's why I went and hunted Wyoming post-winter, as I was like, I've seen this before.
Yeah.
This don't mean anything. There's going to be less deer.
Yeah, I mean, a
There's gonna be-
5-year-old deer that survives winter is a 6-year-old deer the next year. It
Yeah.
just doesn't just
And guess what happens
disappear,
after a
but
big winter event? Your summer range is super healthy.
is better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so like they come back from that as a result. And so I think, who knows the science of it, but I do think that factors in, you know, and based on my observations, it does. And so that was kind of the cycle. And then, you know, it's never been the same, and it's never been bad. I think I would like to where we're at today with a really healthy deer herd. I would say post 07, 08 was some of the better years than it is currently with our light winters, mild winters, and good summers and good range, healthy range. You know, one really cool thing that's happening with our mild winters is our deer are dispersing on the winter range, and they're utilizing different habitat, and our habitat where they used to concentrate kind of on that highway corridor is coming back to life. So I think we've got a store. If they get pushed down in that again, that stuff has had an opportunity to come back. And maybe people will tell me, scientists, people who know more than me would tell me otherwise. But I know for a fact that those deer don't concentrate like they used to, even after the winter. And they're utilizing the landscape different in the winter, which is
the
huge.
reality is in all of that is like everything changes no matter it just does, right?
Yeah,
It's
it
like
just evolves, and
like you
Yeah.
said, there's always the perspective of like the outfitter, the rancher, the trophy hunter, the meat hunter, right? There's no pleasing everybody and all
No.
of this, and you're gonna have these glory years or these awesome points in time where the reality is you're never nothing is sustainable like that anyway. You know, it
No.
kind of is what it is. It is also what makes Gunnison unique to me as an outsider in the sense of like, there's lots of unique things here, and it's not just the good. We've also got the bad here, you know, with that. It's like, it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that
Absolutely.
regard.
and it is kind of unfair to compare '09 to current day the deer herd, just because the deer herd suffers now more from season structures, the efficiency in killing these animals. There's more pressure on that resource now than there was in '09. Like post bad winter, I can't believe they gave out any tags, and obviously it was a very limited number of tags, but just how efficient we've got at finding deer and killing deer. The
Yeah,
desire.
that's also a variable that's changed.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not the same. The way I mean, that whole landscape we've talked about a whole lot. It's like the evolution of like what was probably a fairly small group of guys back then that were successful compared to now with all advances in our
Yeah.
technology and our weapons and our apparel and just everything.
Yeah, when's the last time you saw a guy carrying a spotting scope with a rifle sling? You know, it's changed a little bit for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's it's an interesting
And-
one. We've all had strong opinions about it,
Yeah.
right? And everybody has, because, you know, again, it comes from different perspectives. You've got the ranchers that, have their interests. You've got your hunters that have their interests. It's a fun topic. I mean, we've all debated it, right? I mean, we've all sat around campfires. We've all been to meetings. We've all had beers, and there's some pretty strong opinions on it, right?
Yeah.
And the reality of it, like you said, is there's just too many variables. There's too many. It's like it's not a perfect world. We can't compare apple for apple because they're not the same. Like you said, the season structure changed, the amount of tags given changed, the pressure on the landscape from other factors.
I was going to say,
a hunting related activity. That's a new variable.
I see cow elk hit the winter range before I see the deer hit the winter range almost every year. And I know this is a touchy subject for a lot of people, but BLM grazing, there's which has been going on a long time, but there's pressure on that winter range for sure. And the elk thing is just kind of mind-boggling to me to see those elk bail down in second season. It's like where the deer, they're still in the aspens, and then they kind of do a switcheroo in February. You know what I mean? It's kind of, I don't know, kind of a weird deal.
What I from coming on 25 years of spending a good portion of my days in the field, just simply observing. I'm not a scientist. I'm one person's perspective, but I can speak to it because I have consistently done it enough and made observations and hunted the same country that I have a scale that I can base my perspective off of. And I feel like I've seen in the last 10 years is a lot of change that doesn't make sense, and I'd say even post 07, 08, there was a lot of predictability on where the deer would be when. And, it always varied because just like what we're talking about, but it always varied, but there was consistency in the weather patterns, in deer, elk migrations, where they spent their time. They didn't intermingle like they do now. We didn't have elk along the road. I mean, all this stuff. And so I definitely observed those changes, but they've gotten more or less logical, that don't make sense. You can't put your finger on it. Why are they doing this? It doesn't add up. And I can't explain that, but I know that's what I've observed. And so that's been my experience. I want to go back to one thing when we're talking about the where we're at now presently too, and hunting and pressure and all that. I'm biased. I respect the agency, but what I think I hear commonly when it comes to management is that people point the finger of blame at the managing agency as why we're not getting what we want as hunters, and especially in a traditionally trophy area and what we're producing. Management plays a role, but I think all these other factors are just as much or more of an issue these days. And I really feel like our deer are evolving to our modern ways, you know. And again, that selective harvest, we shoot deer that we kill a lot of deer spot and stock, and they're visual and we glass, and they're visible and we glass them and we hunt and harvest them. And I think we're eliminating that. And, it used to be, I think our population traditionally went out and hunted.
Yeah.
And now we kind of wait for that to happen because you're way more successful than go wandering around in the woods looking for a trophy buck than sitting behind a spotting scope and looking at miles of country. It's more efficient to hunt behind your glass. But I think these deer are evolving, and in the last few years of my late season guiding, what I was observing is these deer would come down around the end of second, and then by the beginning of third, what they were doing is just pushing back in. And I think all of our motorized traffic, hunter harvest along that corridor, that edge of where they're coming out into that kind of staging pre-winter rut range, is we've just pushed them back.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people are like, you still see a lot of deer, but it's like, this is nothing. We don't see nothing compared to what we used to. But I can say in that early part of third, you will, in my experience, and may be different for everyone else, but in my experience, I would see a lot more deer numbers visible on the landscape in that early part of that season. And by the end of that season and into fourth, you're seeing way less deer, and especially way less mature bucks. And I think the deer are evolving. I think the doe harvest has played a role in that. Now that we're harvesting them, it used to be, and it still is, you drive by deer all day that just stand there and look at you. That's changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Now
I
the
do
does
think that's
know they're getting
factoring-
hunted.
Doesn't take long. I actually think that's a really good observation, and it's something that it's worth chewing the cud on a little bit, because I don't think it's just mule deer. I think it's elk. I mean, we've heard of, if you think of it from, we were talking about earlier, like, you know, these studies about whitetail, for example, and there was like something that for 25 years, it was like, hey, whitetail behave in such a manner, or their pattern does this, or they move at certain hours. It's like, and we were just talking about, like, now there's data out there on that's not actually the case. However, it might have been that way for a long time.
Yep.
But all these changes you're
Pressure and
talking about
presence.
have changed it, right? You hear it with coal shy elk. It's even the way elk structure their herds is different now than you know what historically would have been these really big herds with a big dominant bull, multiple, like we're seeing that structure change.
Yes.
We're seeing whitetail move differently. I think it's actually a really interesting point that maybe not everyone has considered, is like all of these improvements, like how we hunt. Like back in the day, you guys were growing up, right? You drove the deer the same way for 15 years, right? It worked, right?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden the tactic is completely different, right? You're manipulating them with food sources. We've got cameras. I mean, there's no end to the spectrum of changes.
We're like
we
pushing
take those
their evolution.
almost for sure. And we've talked about that now. And,
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing with that is it's like, there may be more deer than we're truly seeing, right? It's
Without a doubt.
What you're saying now is a little bit, if I'm getting into some of it, is it's not that there's that many less, but the visible ones have changed. You know, like some of these deer are now not exposing themselves. They're living in the timber. And that obviously has an accumulative effect on everybody's opinion, because everyone goes out there that did something for 15 years, and now they're like, yeah, I used to drive past that field and see 20 deer, and now I don't see any. So there's none.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it is it's an interesting one, and I think it's kind of a fascinating one. I do think it's being accelerated, right? Because everything kind of happens exponentially. Like our change in the last 10 years, 15 per se, but 10 for sure, has been exponentially
Without
changed.
Really pushed them.
You know,
Yep.
our equipment and our techniques. I mean, you think of like the whole glassing thing. It's funny because I did that the very first time I came and hunted elk here. It's like South Africa. I just pounded, man. I just was like, man, if I walk for 5 days nonstop, like,
The
makes
odds are
sense.
You're gonna run into something.
Until I, like we've talked about this whole glassing thing where it's kind of like cat out of the bag a little bit. It's like, man, if you hunt with your optics, if you truly know how to do that, and there's even young guys that, like there's lots of new hunters and bits and pieces. Like it only takes, like, think of a couple of young guys you've met, right? That clicked for them.
Yeah.
And they went to immediately be successful hunters. Obviously, there's a knack to that. Like, it's not
There
just
is.
something that everybody can pick up, but the information is out there now, and it totally changes the landscape on it. So why would things not evolve? And we're changing that so dramatically from year to year that it's kind of an interesting one for sure.
So as we've been talking about this, I've been thinking this is one of my favorite bucks right here. This big old Trident front fork. He was killed in 1963. So on the back of the mount, I think this is so cool, and I think everybody should do it on their mounts. 1963, Bonnie Burfield. Burfield's is across the street over here with Grandpa in the Willys Jeep 3030, driving up Dry Creek, north of the lake.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a really cool story, and that just kind of gives perspective of how different things were at that time. Not only the age class of deer and where they were at what point, but the fact that she's hunting with her grandpa in a Willys Jeep with a 30-30 that maybe had a 4-power fixed scope on it.
Maybe.
Probably not.
Probably open sight.
Yeah, probably open sight.
Yeah.
So we have definitely forced the evolution of those deer, because the chances of you driving up Dry Creek now with your grandpa on an open sight,
You would have
and seeing,
you're guiding, right? Let's just say it was a 15-year kind of span. Like, what were some of your observations in that? Like how you guys did things at the beginning, and even how hunters themselves evolved. you know, to the last few
Did your
years.
tactics change like over that course with Steve? Did your high country tactics ever like make a big change?
You know, I guess I'm careful to even say this, but no.
Okay.
I don't feel like it. You know, I think, you know, high country, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
This
yeah.
what's the name of this podcast?
Yeah,
Or what's
that's what we're talking about.
we're not even to
squeezing
September
information.
Yet,
Yeah.
We skipped
coming.
September. We went to November.
Yeah, exactly.
And no, I'd say, you know, a lot of things stayed the same, and just because it worked, and the same thing in the low country. And, you know, that's part of my observation of this deer retracting thing, is that, you know, we're limited by permit, and so we can hunt certain country. And so a lot of it, you hunt the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And that's where these observations come. It's like, I know there's deer here, I know there's deer here, they're there every year, this is this time, and this is where they come through, and this is what they do. And there just started to be little shifts in all of that like, well, I've seen this over and over and over, and like, I didn't even like consciously make the observation. It was just like, oh, they're not here anymore. They're not doing this, or they're not here then, or whatever. And it just kind of it wasn't something that I was looking for or taking
showed up slowly.
No way to
It's just like after you do something, it's just like, you know, when you drive home, you know, the drive home, you notice if something's out of place, or if, you know, a hubcap fell off, you notice that, or if a tree branch broke or something, you see those things. You're not noting that, you're not looking for it, but it sticks out to you because it's your home and you're familiar with it. And that's kind of how all of this is for me, in a sense of like this country and being in it over and over and over. You automatically just notice these differences. Not that you're seeking them. They just stick out to you when things are different.
Yeah, it's obvious.
Yeah. And things are different.
Things are different.
Yeah, and so what the factors are, who knows? But we can all speak to all of this stuff that's come into play. And I think the way that we are as hunters nowadays is certainly a significant impact, whether we want to own it or not. I think it is. And so anyways.
That's what I say all the time. We are our own worst enemy for,
I think so.
for a lot of this stuff. Like one example was when they outlawed scopes on muzzleloaders. I can't remember in which state. I think it was New Mexico or something. And they came out with that turret sight muzzleloader. And I'm like, we are the problem, right? It's the same thing. Utah just opened up a unit that's going to be primitive only. So it's stick bow or longbow or recurve for their archery season. It's flintlock or wheel lock muzzleloader for their muzzleloader season. And then it's open sight rifles for the rifle season. Well, then they create this turret that allows people with their open sight rifles to shoot 300 or 400 yards. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, we're hurting ourselves, you know?
Where do you draw a line in the sand? It's a tricky one, right? Because you can't keep everybody happy. And that. One of the things as an observation from cattle ranching, and then how private stuff happens in New Zealand and South Africa and stuff like that, is one thing I've always had the observation we're here was the allocation of tags. And I think it's a factor as well, because I think that creates a lot more pressure than people realize, if you couple it with the fact that we're more successful now than we used to be. And I think some of that historically, and the problem, not blaming anybody, right? But we don't actually have the data to show what success rates were before and what they are now. And so if you gave 500 tags to somebody 20 years ago and you give 500 tags now, like, what do you guys think? Do you think we're currently more successful on that?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's some moving goalposts there, right? Like, we don't know. I just wish we had better data.
I know.
We were talking about it earlier. It's
there's no mandatory check stations.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff. Like mandatory, harvest reporting. Like, we should know better. And I like
we
your
have to
point.
do it
It's
in
like,
Oklahoma.
Why don't we can start now. Anyway, I've always thought that was an odd, it's kind of like we're doing the best we can with guesses.
Yeah.
And it's just difficult for me to process, just because it seems like it's counterintuitive, right?
Absolutely.
And we don't have that like biology, like classical biology background, right? Where they're hearing this stuff through their entire schooling, where we're just using our experiences to make these assumptions. And that's why we don't understand when it's just a guesswork. Like, we think there's this many deer, so we think we're going to give this many tags, and we think that they're going to harvest this many. It's like, whoa, there's no hard data to
the
prove.
problem is you've also got find me a biologist who doesn't want that data. They want that data.
Hell yeah.
Right? But they don't get to decide what, that's like this. It's like the right hand doesn't talk to the left. You know, and it's frustrating.
Well, I don't like that. And, there was a point that stuck out to me. I don't know if you remember the Wildlife 101, that CPW and a whole bunch of other people. It was a educational thing that went on up to college for like a couple weeks. But Ian Billick from Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory came in, and he was just talking about science. And he said something that I'll never forget. And he said, as scientists, we only have to be right 51% of the time. And that's good enough to make decisions. And when it comes to management, speaking to management and how that works and what we're observing versus what the numbers say on paper after the model versus the helicopter or whatever, what they do, and I learned this over time from spending time in the office, and props to Brandon Diamond, who educated me significantly and spent the time, gave me the time. I couldn't be more thankful to help educate me to kind of bridge this gap a little bit on my perception of how I thought it all was versus how they see it, and then combining that. And what I learned, one of the most important things that I learned is like, you can dig into the weeds of the model and how accurate it is and their citability and all these little details that are contestable science stuff. But what they do is they manage trends. They try and keep this line going like this.
Yeah.
They want to prevent this. And that's what they do, and that's what they've been doing. And that's why it's successful, despite our observations and preferences of what we see out there, what we think the numbers are, the buck-to-doe ratios, or the age class, or whatever. Ultimately, it's a population objective, and they're using science to the best of their ability to gauge this stuff. And what they're managing for population trends, buck-to-doe ratio trends, is to keep that line flat. And based on their process, they're doing that.
Yeah.
Now, does that meet our preferences as hunters, particularly in Gunnison, as a traditional trophy place? It's not meeting the mark for most people and what they desire based on the number of deer out there and the age class and all that. But ultimately, they're not managed. There's nothing in the management plan that says that we're managing for older age class deer.
Right.
And so realistically, when it comes down to the overall management, the deer and the harvest and all that, we're in a great spot. We have a ton of deer.
They're just
we have a ton of
managing
bucks,
for a healthy
and that's an
herd.
opportunity for everybody. This is a great place to deer hunt.
Yeah.
The problem is it's a traditional trophy area.
Yeah.
And people desire that too, but that is not part of the plan. And so right now, they're hitting their marks on where they want to be.
Because it is a healtty deer population, and
that's the worst thing about it.
That's what they're managing for, which makes a lot of sense to put it in that perspective. It is not what we desire, but it is a healthy deer population.
Yeah,
and like we talked about, we're at an acceptable rate for our buck-to-doe ratio and have been, so we don't have that huge competition die-off if we have a bad winter again. Like, we're at a comfortable place where if that happens, a lot of deer are going to die, but they're not going to out-compete each other to death.
No.
Right? Yeah.
No, and that's that dispersed thing on the range and all that. That's why they are healthy, and we got fawn recruitment is outstanding. And we got healthy deer. I mean, you just drive around and look at them. They're healthy. They're healthy all year. They come into the winter fat and sassy. They come out of the winter looking good.
Yeah.
And the one thing that we have that makes this population so good is our summer range is what makes this deer herd.
And what keeps them alive, too,
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely. And so the winter range would suggest otherwise. This is one of the worst places in the world to
Ice
live
box.
being a deer.
Yeah.
But because we have that, we grow healthy deer. And so it's like, people talk about, harvest rates and all that. We have tremendous harvest rates. You know, I think we're somewhere around 70-80% in our rifle seasons.
And the 20% is just trophy hunters
Right.
that are eating their tags.
And so we're meeting all the objectives because we have a healthy herd. The problem is for us is that we're reproducing them. You know, so then that shifts that window of what of the deer that we have is younger age class, particularly bucks. You know, being that's kind of what we're talking about. But and so we have the numbers of bucks. We just don't have that age class.
because we wipe that slate every year.
We're
Yeah,
good
and
at it.
well, that accumulates over time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like obviously that mature age class will deplete. You know, from
Well,
from 1 year to the next to the it'll over time. And we've seen that happen here. I think that's fairly hard to dispute now. That sure, there's some really big old bucks before, but on average, again, they don't care how old a deer is here, right? We've got basically juvenile deer and mature deer, right? It's like a pretty giant spectrum of
yeah.
fawns and mature deer, right? It's not when you and I talk about it, we're talking about fawns, 2.5-year-olds, 5.5-year-olds, and 9-year-old deer, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of yeah, it's an interesting
And it would
one.
be crazy to see. I mean, there's obviously no way to even like quantify this, but to see what percentage of buck fawns make it from when they hit the ground to when they get to 6 years old, what that looks like 20 years ago and what that looks like current day. Because we can take a stab at what percentage of those buck fawns that hit the ground reach 5 or 6 years old,
It's just
but it's not.
too many variables now.
Yeah.
Like
Too
we just
many
can't
variables.
compare back then to now. It's you just
Well,
can't.
and guess
It's
what
tricky.
happens? I think they've proved this over and over in the whitetail world. But once a deer is on that 3-4-year-old cusp, guess what? He gets a lot smarter.
Yeah.
And we're seeing
It's
less
like the
of those.
light bulb
sure.
comes on,
Yeah,
you know.
and so those deer still exist. They're operating different.
Yeah.
And we have that Achilles and we have those season dates that make them vulnerable, but they're not all vulnerable because they're not all out. So we see this portion of the population, but it's a small percentage of what we're observing when we're out there during these seasons, even as late as they are, percentage-wise. You go out and see 200 deer in a day, I call that a good day. Right now. Well, guess what? We're talking about 20,000 deer in the basin. So you're seeing a small percentage of deer per day, and we're using that as our point of reference of what we think is out there. And it is a small segment, and unfortunately, we're scraping the cream off that top. I think a lot more now than we are the deer that live from 10,000 feet to 8,000 feet in the trees and the aspens and timber.
Totally.
That's why
and we're not hunting them.
That's why I've been always fascinated, and I kind of quiz you guys on it. Is like, what are the sheds telling us, right? And I'm always I don't get clear
But some
answers
do
from you
like
guys.
a
I don't.
reverse migration. Like that's the thing is we have hay meadow bucks, we have sage country bucks, we have timber bound bucks, and we have high country bucks. Who knows where they go
Yeah,
at what time of year?
I
Like
guess
they're
it
just
does
like
vary, but I've always wondered. It's like I feel like I could come to. I don't know how seriously you shed hunt now, but let's say one of our. I'm going to pull you guys all into that pool. I'm coming to you and being like, "What do you guys think? Where are we at?" Right?
yeah.
And-
Which is a
and
good
just 'cause
indicator.
I think it's a good observation, right? It's like if you went out there and you're like,
It's a sample.
yeah, there's some giants out there.
Yeah.
Like, there's some friggin' legit
Yeah.
big deer.
Yeah.
I didn't find, or would you tell me like, of course, there's variables in this, but I feel like it's good data, right? That,
It's a
that not a
sample.
lot of people
Yeah.
have because it's a fairly small group of people that are kind of collecting this amount of. And I've always thought it was an interesting because it's a genuine it's a tell, right? It is a tell
Yeah.
to some degree
Absolutely.
in
and
that
that's
regard.
what I remember my dad talking to the Division Wildlife when they talk about the numbers and like, hey, we have more mature bucks than we've ever had, we have more numbers than we've ever had, which we know is not true. And it's like, well, when people are coming to sell us antlers, we see that,
Yeah.
right? You see that
Yeah.
difference. They don't want
It's
to
a
listen to what
harvest.
we have to say. It is a harvest, totally.
Yeah.
So you get to see what comes in. They're
Yeah.
like, well, they're just selling to somebody else. My dad's like, no, these people have been selling to me for 15 years. Like they're not
and
selling to somebody
what
else.
they bring in and
Absolutely.
what they're capable
and
of.
And even if they're not selling them, they're showing them, right? It's something
Absolutely.
like, yeah, these are the ones I'm selling, but I found this one. And progressively, that has gotten less and less every year. So it's hard for us to listen to that, when they're like, oh, yeah, this is the most deer this basin has ever had. And it's like, no. It's not, because we have those samples from the winter range.
Could also be an age class thing, there's a variable in that as well. And
but the amount of antlers too is definitely different. And on a year like this, it's an anomaly in a drought where they are scattered,
Well, and that's what I was talking about earlier. I think that has become a trend, is that this concentrated population has dispersed out. I mean, for me, there's few things that I like more than driving around in the winter and observing wildlife on the winter range. I don't get excited about it anymore. I think just last winter, I went out on a day that I thought would be primo, overcast day, and it's going to be good. The conditions have been good. They should be feeding little fresh snow, should be able to see tracks and just see this whole layout, and go out for 6 hours and see 30 deer. Back in the heyday, that would be a 300 plus deer drive.
Yeah, I was going to say, you'd see 60 deer in your first 10 minutes.
And in the last, we'll just say 10 years, that has progressively gotten less and less. And my interest in going out in the winter has gone down. It used to be like, I would go out and I would find one deer that I wanted. I'd find a respectable buck, try and stay on him for the winter and pick him up. I don't even bother anymore.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. But because I can't find them like I used to be able to. And they don't stay where they were.
The pressure in people shed hunting has totally changed as
so
well.
I
It's
think
a totally
that
different landscape as well.
Everything.
Yeah, it does.
And that's where, for me, I got to fall back on what I learned with the years of spending time in the office, is that we're managing for trends, and the trends suggest that we are where we need to be, despite seeing what we desire.
And there's ideals, right? There's when I put my opinions out there, which are strong for some of this stuff, there's ideals I want. I've always liked and I'm not necessarily a trophy hunter, but I have always liked the unique pockets of things, where my personal preference is that instead of blanketly managing things, because I'm not blaming anybody here, it's just like, if it was me and I had this really unique population of like big mule deer or elephant that had incredible, tusk genetics, or a fish or a bird species that was truly very unique, not as its own individual species, but within its pool, right? Mm-hmm. So for the context of this conversation, it's like mule deer. We got mule deer all over the West, right?
Yeah.
But Gunnison has a unique, in my opinion, portion of it, right?
Absolutely.
And so my selfishness, right, for the deer's benefit to some degree, just to kind of like preserve that niche within the species. I've always liked, it's like the lake trout in the lake, It's like, and I know there's no way to like draw the line on this, and it could be a total personal preference, right? We could be living in an area where there's whitetail for you and mule deer for me, or vice versa, right? Our preferences are going to be totally different.
Absolutely.
On how that happens. I've always been intrigued by that. I like the idea. It's like,
you've told me that before. Like why would you not manage this as the special place that it is? Like this isn't your average mule deer unit in Colorado.
Not close.
This is a world-class resource that we treat like the other units, and we shouldn't. We should treat it differently, and we do treat it differently, just not quite to the standard that we desire, right? I mean,
and I think that's the problem, is because we got like of the highest buck to doe ratio management objective in the entire West. Like that's a fact.
Yeah, for sure.
But we're not growing our deer. But guess what? A lot of other places are not growing old deer as much as, you take the Ponsagon or the Strip or the Kaibab or whatever. Just like Gunnison, big deer still exist. I don't care what anybody says, what they see out there, what antlers come in, there's big deer out there.
Yeah.
And so we're just not seeing them as much. And so, But I think that's happening all over the West. And so, yeah, what do we do with that, you know? And we were talking earlier, I think one of the biggest inhibitors that we have moving forward, particularly in this state, I know it's a big deal in Wyoming, but it's CWD, and the fact that mature deer are mature bucks in particular are said to be the biggest carrier spreaders of it. And so with that factor, I don't know how we get back into these conversations about how we want to manage and what the desired results are. With that factor in place, it's going to be really hard to sell growing mature deer moving forward in the future anywhere there's any kind of prevalence of CWD. And that's really unfortunate for me, a guy that loves big trophy mule deer. It's a reality that I've come to accept. And you know what I got to believe, and what proves itself every year, is that there's big deer out there, and I see them, hear about them, see pictures, videos, whatever. They're out there, and I think there's a lot that are going home that are getting tacked on a garage that they don't care. They got the meat, but they just shot a 190 buck that we all dream of when they're just wandering around in the woods. I think that's happening as much or more than it used to be. And the guys gunning are hunting a select population of the edge deer with glass and all that, while the other random hunters that are just hunting are probably, I've seen a lot of big deer leave this country that I never heard about, never saw on social media, and there was no rumors. They didn't show up in a magazine, whatever. They were just in a truck or a four-wheeler or in a camp or whatever, and nobody heard anything about it. I think those deer are still getting killed all the time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, management and all that, like, my thought is we got to work with what we got. We do have to respect the agency. If we're going to support things like Prop 127 and believe in science-based management, we got to put our money where our mouth is.
I know, that was kind of a funny, I remember talking to you about that. I'm like, looking at all this stuff, you know, I'm preaching like, trust the scientists, and it's like, well, I haven't been. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm like, all right, let's make an exception here for this one time only.
Yeah. So I don't know, you know, where we're going forward. I think what we got to do is we got to believe, we got to participate in opportunities for conservation. We got to unite as sports people and be able to keep hunting alive, and you know, all this kind of stuff that's getting in the way of what was traditionally engaging with the agency and having these conversations. There's not even room for it right now. I mean, the wolves and blah, blah, blah.
We have done a great job with keeping that line of communication open with the Division of Wildlife, because I see, so you look in the Boone and Crockett record books, or you look in our big bucks, right? Olathe, Montrose, Crawford, Paonia, like these places are killing big deer back in the day. Rangeley, I mean, all over the state. But they weren't as vocal when it started to go downhill and they started to give these allocations that are just crazy. They weren't as vocal as the Gunnison sports people are. So you can tell if you go down to those areas now, the resources is depleted. The age class isn't even anywhere near. So it makes you thankful for what we have, but it is important to know that you do need to be vocal about your desires and keep that line of communication open, because they are our resource and they do want to hear it. They have their objectives and they have their trends that they want to manage to, but we have to stay vocal. You know.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think right now in Gunnison, in light of management and getting involved and having an opinion and all that, the double-edged sword is we got a healthy deer herd. And that makes management easy for them in the context that they got to harvest these deer. And the conversations about managing, we're at buck to doe ratios, you know, like we're there, everything's there. We're just not growing the trophies that we desire. And so that sucks. And I say this tongue in cheek, I've said it a lot, but the best thing we could have is a bad winter. Because we would reset, and that would force the hand to drop the license allocation and all that. And I don't really want to see that, but that is what it would take, because right now with the allocation that they're having, what they give out and the harvest success is we can't really do better. And so it's not even like if we killed more bucks or killed more does, we're going to all of a sudden have bigger deer. that machine is running smoothly.
Yeah.
And so it's
You're
not
right.
contestable, you know. And so we're at all the objectives and it's all happening the way it's supposed to. It's just not working to our advantage for us who believe and cherish this resource as being traditionally a trophy deer producing area. And that's a double-edged sword. I said when they changed the season dates, I was like, I hope we wipe these deer out and we just do a big harvest and we get rid of a bunch of deer. Then we can get back in the meeting room and we can start discussing adjusting these tag numbers. Well, it never happened.
Yeah, I remember
and
you
then our
talking
winters
about
got
that.
mild consistently and we just kept growing deer and here we are.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that's where we're at. Things are where they need to be from a management perspective. They're not where we desire them, the ideals from a trophy perspective, but we can't lose sight. Those deer still exist. I think what's happening is we're having to hunt harder for them, and we haven't accepted that, and we've evolved as hunters away from our true traditions of being hunters versus killers. I think we're killers, and I'll speak to it from my perspective. Is that I cherish hunters, but I evolved into being a killer over time because you could with the optics and rifles and all that. And I talk about that from a personal standpoint and a professional standpoint. That's the reality. And so I'll be the first one to own it and the first one to criticize it too.
Yeah,
but that has impacted things. There's no
It's a
question.
great observation, honestly, Cody. That's a really great observation. And it
Insightful.
was something we've talked about as well. It's kind of like we know what we're capable of, but it's like the needle moves as well. So now it's like, I mean, literally we're coming up with stuff to like change our success, you know, whether it's like hunting with a stick bow or then hunting with a muzzle loader. And like we're blessed we are to have this, you know,
I know.
this
to put it
scope
all
that,
in
like you
this
said, like back in the
perspective.
day, it was just this thing. And it's part of being something that you and I discussed when we wanted to start this podcast was kind of like, let's come back to sharing some of what I think. I totally agree with you.
Campfire
that's been lost,
stories.
you know, like, you know, and I think your wording of like the difference between like what was a hunter and what's now a killer is probably, it is what it is, right? But there is somewhere in the middle of that. There's a triangle we can make there. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point.
Because the hunt, I mean, I was having this conversation with my wife today. Actually, it's like the pursuit means more to me. Like obviously the harvest is like, I love it.
Yeah.
But so I'm up in the high country the other day. I see this white flower, green petal leaves, little ladybug on it, pushing through this rock scree field with all this yellow grass all around it. Like it's just powering through. Everything else is dead, not coming to life yet. And that thing's coming through. And like, those are the things that I value being out there, right?
Yeah.
Like those are the little things that, yeah, when September rolls around, I'm going to want to kill a deer, but it's the whole encompassing experience of that hunt, right?
Yeah.
Like it's starting now, and I'm looking at those little things of just like, it's just special.
I think
you know?
hunters evolve like that as well to some degree, right? There's like, you think about your like young childhood
Like over the course of
excitement.
your life,
Yeah,
yes.
like, you know, you see it with a lot of guys, right?
Yep.
They'll kind of, I don't know, full circle's the word, right? But you'll like, you've got that excitement and you get that kind of bloodlust and you kind of go through that. And then eventually you kind of get to the point where what and why you're doing it becomes a bit more important, you know.
And
It
how.
doesn't I mean, all those perspectives on that kind of stuff for sure. And so that does the younger generation, and with our current social media, right? A lot of us are in that middle ground, you know, the pool of people at the, you know, that like our generation gap is different in the technology. So a lot of the guys that are in this, like, why I do it and how I do it, right? They don't have as much of a voice as this like influential crowd of people that are getting the
Without
limelight,
a doubt.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've thought about that even in regards to like ethics and stuff like that. It's like when you were back in like your deer camps, you know, and you had your dad there and you had your whatever, your uncles or your neighbors or the farmers, right? That's what set a lot of the ethics, right? And it kind of like created this balance. I've seen this shift where now that doesn't exist, right? There's no one there to be like, we don't do that, you know, like this is not something that maybe in that hunting potty they'll do that, but we don't. That now is like I don't know what the word is. It's like head in the sand, right? It's like I'm not going to get blamed for it because I'm not going to get called out for it. So that dynamic has also changed in that regard to, just what people are exposed to, whether it was your grandparents or whatever. It could just be a longer term tradition of, but they were interacting, where like, and sure, everyone does kind of crazy stuff. I've thought about it. It's like, I've been young. I've done lots of redneck stuff. And you come back and you tell your granddad or something, and they're like, yeah, it's not a big deal, but just so you know, like, this is why we don't do that or this. And, you kind of get that. It's like, okay, but if that goes unchecked with enough people, then you kind of get to this point where we lose that sensitivity to, what those ethics are. And like you said, just kind of remembering, like, to be a hunter and not a killer,
Well, that's what I would add to that. I think it's not only the ethics, but the skill sets. Just honing into instinct.
Yeah.
And the skill sets that we learn, tracking and learning habitat and how animals utilize it and all of that. Sobering thing for me is, my oldest son, it will be his first year of hunting this year, and I'm like, well, I know we could go out and find a deer and harvest a deer, probably pretty good chance of it, right? And it's like, I don't want to teach him how to kill deer. I want to teach him how to hunt deer. I want his nose on the ground and his eyes up, same time, all the time, Like, you got to be full observation of where you're at. And we're going to go hunt. We're not going to drive, we'll probably do some driving around glass and all that, because that's hunting too.
Yeah.
But I want him to have an intimate relationship with the environment around him.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you can really grow. And I feel like what you're talking about, for sure, the ethics thing, and then I'll add to that what I feel like is we're losing a little bit is just that intimacy with the landscape and the skill sets that come and evolve with that by hunting in manners that were more traditional in the past than they are currently.
Are. Like, there's certain skills or tools available to us now, and you kind of detach yourself. You're like, yeah, if I know how to do this, and it does detach you from the whole landscape and the animals and stuff like that. And yeah, and
this year with my daughter who's 6, right? I really same thing. I want to teach her how to hunt the right way, how my ethics align with everything, right? And so take this old gun, we go out, we do a 1.5 mile stalk on this deer, we belly crawled at 80 yards, shoot this thing with a 130-year-old gun, right?
Sweet.
And I could have had all the kids in the truck, which they were, and my wife, lay down next to the truck, shot that deer at 500 yards. But I'm like, what would that have taught her? And the best part was I hit that buck and he ran into the timber. And I was like, okay, we're going to wait. We're going to give this buck time. And we gave him time. And then we got on blood and we got, she's spotting blood. So I'm like, she got to do the full experience. And then this was the ego check for me. So it was a private land only tag, right? I found that buck. I was like, yep. One of the places that I had access to, I never went and looked at. Because I was like, yeah, that's a 2x4. He's obviously going to breed does, bad genetics. That's the buck we're going to go in with the old gun and kill.
Yeah.
Well, on one of those places that I had access to hunt, didn't look there. After I killed that buck, there is a nice buck on there. Somebody showed me a picture of a nice buck on there, and I'm like, I'm kicking myself up and down the plate. I'm just like, I can't believe that I went in there on opening day and did this. But that was the ego check, is I'm like, if I would have known that deer was there, no kids, I'd have taken my Weatherby. I'd have went in there and I'd have shot that deer at 450 yards.
Absolutely.
But that experience was more valuable to me and more valuable to my daughter than that ego of me killing a 185-inch buck would be, right?
Yeah.
So
without
that was like, I really had some turmoil with that, because I was like, this part of me wants to kill something big, and this part of me wants to teach my kids the right way to do it and have them experience it to its full effect.
I think it's interesting for probably people to hear us talk about that specifically as like a non-hunter, right? Because I've always thought there's such a giant gamut of like life experiences and emotions that tie into that. Like, even making that consideration, it's like, had you known, you'd admit to probably doing that. But in hindsight, this was the right decision. Like, we get to do this all the time. This is not a once-off occurrence. Like, in all of our careers, or someone that's been hunting a lot, there's lots of these things you're weighing all the time. You know, I think it's what makes hunting really unique, and for someone to. It's hard for someone to understand how many emotions you're balancing all the time in this. Which I think
want to cry, want to laugh, want to scream.
Yeah,
all
it isn't not. It's not just go out bloodshed thing. And I know I have friends that are non-hunters, and are you gonna go blow something away? And it's just like, whoa. If that's the impression that I've given you about what this means to me, then I've done a poor job.
Some of it you have to experience, though. It's hard to explain sometimes.
I agree.
Because you'll take that same person out and have an encounter with something, and they'll be like, oh, I had no idea, that this would be the way it was, and this would be the experience.
There's so much around it.
Exactly.
And that happened at Shondeck's house the other day. We were having a barbecue, and they're like, what are we eating? And I was like, it's lion. And they're like, lion? I'm like, yeah, that's mountain lion. And it's a bunch of non-hunters there, right? And they all ate the mountain lion. And then I pull out the pictures and I tell them the story. And I'm like, we're after an older age class Tom. And this is why you use dogs, because you can harvest selectively on sex and age and all this stuff. And I'm telling them about, when you see a lion, it's a flash. It could be a 90-pound female, or it could be a 180-pound male. And if you just shoot it, you might have just shot a pregnant female and you didn't know it. Yep. So they didn't understand why there was dogs, why you're targeting these older age class animals. And eventually they were just like, I had no idea. Like a newfound respect for all of that.
Good on you.
Just because of that conversation, which is cool. But it's also kind of shocking just growing up in this world to there's a lot of people that just have no clue. You know what I mean? Like, no idea of why we do what we do. It's like they just see the Instagram picture. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. One point in that, which I've always liked, like you kind of know, is like, I think food is a factor in this. It's a good way to bridge the gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you're dialed in with this, and it's one of the easier ways because it does create the full circle of kind of like allowing you the position to kind of explain how things are, and not just looking at a set of antlers on a wall. Like if there's a steak on the plate or a conversation around a campfire and a grill, it's the right segue, for that, and adding the value to it. I'm curious. I know we're kind of at our cap here, but I think there's lots of
dude. I have like 4 pages of lists. Yeah.
I want to hear some. I want to see if there's really like some standout mule deer encounters you've had. Maybe it's a hunt, maybe it was just an encounter with a deer, maybe there's just a really unique deer that stands out to you. Have you got something?
I've got 2 questions on this that'll kind of direct this a little bit. Okay,
every single one of them.
I know. Yeah, you're gonna have to pick a couple.
Exactly. We're gonna have to have Cody on for a second one for sure, because we didn't even get to talk about the high country besides my flower.
Well, you can edit a bunch of stuff out, but I think we've had a really good conversation too. So I mean, I don't know what you would edit out, but
I'm not going to edit anything out.
We're keeping it all.
So this question is, what are some weird things that people won't think about that really matter when you're making a stock on a deer? Like something that you would key in on behaviorally on a mule deer after that much time spending that somebody else who's new to it might not pick up on. Some little quirk, some little tick, something like that before they blow out, if they sense you.
As far as deer, you know what? I just want to pick on you right now. And the only reason I'll do that is because it's something that I've identified, and I've just heard it in your excitement building up for this hunt, and it's something that I've done. I have just a touch more control with it than I used to, and that's not overthinking things. And so it's not thinking about all that stuff. I think that's all important, but for me as a hunter, if you were to ask me where my success has come from, it hasn't been from any strategy that I've ever implemented. Whether it's shooting, finding deer, successful stocks, shooting is a big one for me. I am a misser on first shot. I get so keyed up. Second shot, you guys mentioned the blackout thing, like where you just go into blackout and all of a sudden you made the shot and it's just like, I don't even know where I held or what, and so I tell people this a lot is like, you trust your gut and let the noise settle
100%.
down. And so don't think about every little detail. It's like, let your instinct kick in. If you can do that, your success will go up. We think about too much. I mean, for me, it's like in 2 minutes, I'll think about how I'm going to have him pictured here, and then where he's going to go on the wall, and what he's going to taste like, and who I'm going to call first, and like, is this going to happen, or is the wind changing? Is everything messed up? And it's just like this whirlwind, that just goes through my head of all this garbage. Which includes like, is that pica gonna screw this thing up, or that little wind shift, is it all over? Do I need to freak out? Do I need to back out? All this stuff goes through your head, and the reality is, I know both of you have experienced this, and anybody probably listening has had an experience in their life where the lights went out and all that thinking went away, and you just kicked into this mode. Because for me, I believe that every one of us has primitive DNA that makes us hunters, and it's a matter of tapping into that. And so for me, in speaking to that and hearing you and all your excitement and all that, and thinking about what if, maybe, could be, and this is what I do, and I go in at this time, and all this, it's like, throw all that out the window and just use your instinct when the time comes, because there's never been any two scenarios that are the same. It all applies, and it's a cumulative thing that builds over time that turns into wisdom after you've exercised it enough. But realistically, like somebody starting out, is try and find that in you. Try and find your instinct. Try and slow yourself down. Forget about the blog or the book you read or whatever, and meet yourself there in the moment on the mountain, and let that just come out of you naturally. That, to me, is one of the biggest things. Now, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does,
but that's what I thought about.
I mean, that is very good, because it's funny because I'm right now, I'm in the stage of like, I want to think about everything, and I don't, but when I get in that moment, I am very confident in my instinct. You know what I mean? I'm very, very confident in the way I react in situations. I don't think about it when I'm in that situation. I'm thinking about it now. Yeah. I just don't think about it when I'm there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's funny because I'm thinking like, okay, well, don't take a low odds stock. And I'm like, what would a low odds stock be like? Do I even know what that looks like? And then I'm watching these hunting videos today, and I'm like, why in the hell would he approach from that side? You know what I mean? It's like, totally. That's not going to work. He blows a deer out, and you're like, I saw that coming from 400 yards away, because
saw it right off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it is funny, and that's a great key. Don't overthink things, and the instinct will come with experience. You've got that inside of you, but it will come with that experience.
Yeah, and so I don't feel like that answers your question, but I feel like I'm.
No, I think it was actually a really interesting perspective, and it's a tricky balance to create, because it's like, it's not that you're not aware of some of those things. You just have to channel and tune in what's truly matters and doesn't matter, and those
senses get so heightened, right? In that final approach, it's like everything is just firing, right? Like you can smell better, you can see better, you're just any little noise or anything, you're so tuned into that moment, and that's like the rush, that's the high, right? Is that
tapping into that
is like when it all just comes together, and it's like I am never more keyed in than when it's like, when you're 50 yards from a mule deer, and it's like you're not thinking about anything else, right? There's nothing else on the planet that you're thinking about besides in that moment.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, no doubt. And I think for me, why I steer away from giving an answer about a specific to consider is that I think, I'll say humbly, my experience over time has told me I haven't seen anything consistently enough ever happen, reoccur over and over enough for me to say that this one thing is one thing to key in on. That every scenario is different. The one consistent thing is when you can flip that switch and go into that mode. That's what matters. And that takes experience. But if you're going to hone something, whether you want to work out or practice on your shooting or your e-scouting or whatever, like the biggest thing is to hone into that natural instinct and all of it. It all applies. It'd be like, this is where, and I'll speak to, you mentioned somebody new coming into it. So it's just like you read the book or the blog or whatever, and you get an idea, this is where you want to look for animals and how you want to do it and all that. It's like, that's all fine and good. And generally that's going to probably give you enough success as a new person to be satisfied. But to evolve a little bit quicker, I think it's back off from that stuff and hone your instinct. Yeah. Look where the book didn't tell you, or whatever, and broaden yourself out. Let yourself feel it. I've got a buddy who's got a second season tag who's just wound up about hunting, and I love it. It's the same as you. You have to put some preparation into it. Yeah. So e-scouting now. And all this, thinking about where you want to go. And I said, dude, you're only going to know when the time comes, what the weather conditions are, where the deer are, what the feed is, the temperature, snowfall or lack thereof, and all of that. So it's like you can narrow down some country that you want to hunt on a tag like that. But it's like, if you were to ask me what I would do, is I would say I would not lose any sleep until a week before the season comes, and then really key in on what's going on, get out there, make some observations, and then start to move with that, what you're feeling, and then get in country and read sign and see what's going on. And this is in the context of rifle hunting, where it's a little bit more wild card, where I think you do have to, you're tuning in or tapping into a broader portion of that instinct, because it's this collective where, like, you've targeted deer in the high country. That's different. You're not locating where the deer are at that time of year or anything. You've been watching that deer for 2 months. And it's different than in the rifle seasons, where it's like, you were watching every inch of the ground and then watching what's going on here, and then your wind and your weather patterns and all of that, and capitalizing on certain conditions. I say this all the time. People that are around me a lot, it gets old to them, but it's like, when overcast day, I'm like, what kind of day it is today, don't you? It's a good hunting day, because I love hunting overcast. I just love hunting overcast as a gun hunter. Now, if we want to gravitate back to where this should have started, was high country. I don't like clouds on high country, because that usually means there's going to be shifting thermals. Correct. And that's not something that suggests that has to happen, but in my experience, a bluebird cooker day that you don't even want to be there because it's so beaten down on you is going to be a good day to hunt thermal. And you're going to have less of that wind switch and all that stuff. So but it all boils back to, I think, if there's one skill set that you want to hone, is it's figuring out, feeling that instinct, whether it's shooting or whatever, and then expanding on that versus using methodology to focus on. That's all important. Prep in all those different aspects is important, and it's good knowledge to obtain. But if you only use that, it's likely you'll just kind of recreate the same results over and over. And eventually you'll get lucky and think that it mattered, the formula and that's what created the success. But in years of success and lots of failure, I would say a lot of that stuff, it doesn't really apply consistently enough to bank on, to just focus on I'd say that like solely. More so
now, I'm kind of like reading into that a little more, because I never have in the past.
What's
right?
That?
Just all of it, like the prep work, because I've never really needed to, right? Like my first archery deer tag, it was all instinct. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't, and it was a lot of failure to learn what was going on. But I'm so jacked for this tag. I gotta put that energy like somewhere, right? That's going to be maybe beneficial, maybe not, but I got to put that energy somewhere, because that is such a focus of mine right now, you know?
Well, and I think that you spoke to it with the ladybug earlier. You know, I think if that's part of the experience you desire, that's what you should do.
Yeah.
You know, as
Just
long
go
as
look
you're
at flowers. That's what I'm going to do.
as long, or whatever, if it's lifting weights or shooting or whatever it is, if you see that as part of your experience, that will make the experience.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I've said this for years, I still believe it, 100%. For me personally, I like scouting more than hunting. Hunting, I change. I think different, I feel different. Everything changes, but I love scouting and soaking it up and watching the sunrise and hearing the sounds and smelling the smells. Like, a lot of that goes away when I'm hunting, and it's not intentional, it just does.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the most important thing that I've learned over time, especially guiding, is that we can get hyper-focused on an objective or a goal and miss the whole entire experience. You know, one thing that I prided myself on is providing an experience. You know, over time, I've had maybe more hunters than not leave this valley complimenting one of the best hunts of their life and did not even chamber a round. And that is ultimate success to me. If you can go out and have an experience of a lifetime that you note or rank as one of the best experiences without harvesting an animal, you've achieved the right objective, in my opinion. Now, an animal or a harvest or a trophy or whatever is a cherry on top to me.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we're not selling as much. I think we do kind of romantically in our literature these days and social media that we're really sold on this experience, but you know, that doesn't sell as much to sharing stories in camp and all that. It does to some people, but it's generally the highlights. It's the ESPN of hunting is what we really like to talk about, you know. You know, at the end of the year, like you got a tag. Did you fill it? Did you get a good one? It's not like, how was it?
Yeah.
You know, what was your first day like? Your second day like? What did you see? What birds did you identify out there? You know, you never talk about that. But I think that's what we're missing, and I'm not suggesting that anybody's missing that, but I feel like what I've observed is that, and personally, a lot of this I can confirm because I observe it and then I experience it personally. And I do it all the time. I just lose sight and I get hyper-focused. And I think on a tag like what you got, embracing all of that is the experience. You know, applying for it when you know you have the points is part of the experience.
I was telling my wife, it's like this is like multiple years, but this is a full year of like, this is like, I knew that I was going to do this, you know, last fall. So it's like, this is just, it's just always on my mind. And that was the goal, you know what I mean? But it is about the experience. And I think that I've found more success in enjoying this experience and letting go of that drive where you're just trying to force something to happen, right? You just want to get to that end goal and you're forcing nothing's coming together. And then finally you're just like, you know what? I'm sitting at 12,000 feet. Look at this view look at that little pike who did this, blah, blah, blah. And then you find success when you finally like let go of the ultimate goal. You know what I mean? You're like, I'm just blessed to be up here. I'm blessed to be doing what I'm doing. And then it just like all falls into place after that.
Ta-da. No, I think that's great. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And you know, I mean, I think that's what I like to encourage people. You know, I think there's a tendency when I have conversations with people who know me or don't know me or whatever, you know, you want to talk about these highlights and all this and just be like, you know, I hate to disappoint people, but you know, what my experience has told me is to enjoy the experience, you know, and not lose sight of what it's all about, you know.
It is so cool.
It encompasses I mean, you've heard me talk about like the whole, like, especially for international trips, right? Where you've got this like anticipation coming up. And then I've always loved like the preparation, whether it's like, getting into the gear side of things and geeking out on that, and then your own physical preparation, and then your own skill set, right? And all of that to me is like, it might be a 10-day hunt, but it's actually a year-long hunt.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
one thing I was guilty of with some of that I've got a lot better at now is the whole process up until you killed something, right? And then cutting the animal up and processing it. I used to go pretty quickly into like, hey, I got that done, you know, now it's like the next thing, you know. And I'm sure some people do this at different stages at it, but I had a friend one time who was like, this is like the time to savor it, because it's kind of like you've had this kind of big emotional, you know, dump of adrenaline and everything. You've got a dead animal in front of you, and some people are very good at kind of respecting that at the time, and I am. We've always had a kill flask and stuff like that, but I still jump to the next process of like, hey, now I need to like get it cut up, I need to get it in game bags, and now I've kind of got better at being like, there's a pretty quiet moment if you spend some time after just sitting still, being quiet, not saying anything, and just kind of soaking it up a little bit. You know, just savoring that moment a little bit, that I was guilty of for sure, especially when you do the guiding thing, right? Because it's just like next, you know, like you're just trying to like, you kind of rush your way through some of that.
And that bull with my stick bow last year, that was one of the coolest like sit down quiet moments that I've had. Like I'm sitting in the middle of this bright green aspen grove, the rain's like lightly falling. I can feel it on my neck moment. And everything.
Once
and
you've
it's
done
just
that a few times, actually sitting quietly after the fact and truly sitting quietly after the fact is an interesting feeling.
Well, it's funny you say that became a thing, and I didn't do it with all hunters, but it was common for me that whenever we harvested a deer, I would tell the hunter, I said, you need to go up there by yourself. I think the animal's done, and you need to go up there. I'm just going to give you a minute, or I'm going to go back, do something or whatever, but you need to go up there and spend some time by yourself. I was very intentional about that.
That's cool.
It's a good thing to...
And some guys probably didn't understand it. They're like, let's cut this thing up, man.
Well, you get a variety of people, but I think a lot of people did appreciate it, didn't think about it. You know, guiding situation, it is that, like, this is business kind of thing, and so you take care of things and you get on with it, and you got to, you know, pack out and do all that. And so there's a timeliness to things for safety and a number of reasons, but you got to savor that. And one big one too with me that I think I annoyed a lot of people with, but shifted their perspective once they got home, and I'll speak to this because they spoke to it, is taking a bunch of time to take pictures. You know, and people are like, this is ridiculous. And some people, like, you want to take one picture and they're good. And it's like, no, we're going to do this. I'm going to clean the blood off, and we're going to set it up. And so it's not just like a sprawled out deer with its tongue hanging out. And we're going to get some shots the way that I know how to do this. And they get that, and they get home, and that becomes that lasting memory. And being intentional about that and kind of savoring the moment, honoring the animal. I know it kind of feels like grin and grab ego thing, but there's an aspect of that I do think is honoring the animal and the experience. And then when it's not just this like dead deer on its side with its legs out and its tongue hanging out, and that's a picture that captures a memory, and that's adequate, and I'm not criticizing that. But when you're intentional about it, and then you can put that blown up deal on your desk or the shelf or next to the deer or whatever.
And you remember it all.
It's
you
a
remember
different
the whole
thing.
experience. That snapshot is that you look at that as the guide or the hunter with remembering that all-encompassing process, right? Like other people might just see a picture, but it's very important to the hunter himself to remember the things that they experienced.
It was another intentional piece.
Yeah.
You know, even though it's just picture taking and that's like ego brag, whatever. I understand that.
We did that a lot in South Africa. I learned that from a couple of good professional hunters as well. Was like, and it may seem a little odd, like you said, like it seems like it's a bit weird, and so there's a nuance to it. There's a balance to doing it respectfully, but you know, you don't end up with just like, hey, my only photo of this thing has got this guy blinking, or there's a friggin' piece of grass right in front of something that, and it doesn't actually take that long, especially when you kind of know what you're doing.
Yep.
But I've done that before where I'm like, we're totally like, we need to, I don't need to change direction completely. Like, you know, and it can really make I don't know, it's an interesting one. It is kind of a lasting memory that you have with it, and it can be done respectfully. It can also be done unrespectfully. Like sometimes I've seen stuff where I'm like, you know, that's
for sure.
This detracts from this a little bit.
Yeah.
But I've also, just because clients have also, like it actually makes a big difference. It's an interesting perspective.
Well, this makes me think, like, you know, and you guys are probably like this too. If I arrow something, right, I'm going to just start texting people because I have 30 minutes to fill before I'm able to go look for that thing. But that makes me think, like, this year, if I'm lucky enough to get it done, just savoring that to yourself, like not texting it because it's not going anywhere. They're going to know about it eventually, but just like taking that all in, you know, to a point when you have your quiet moment with that animal, then text your buddies, you know what I mean, and be like, I got him, because it doesn't need to happen right away. And like I said, most of the time you're just trying to like fill that time, but that even gives me some perspective on what I want it to look like and feel like and be like, out of respect for the animal.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
He's down.
Yeah, right.
There's no one size fits all either, right? It's not like we're saying like you can, I mean, because you can even like give someone a moment to themselves, and 5 minutes later you can come up and do the high fives. And 5 minutes later you can do it's just, sometimes everything gets rushed together.
Yeah.
Like it's a blur that you're talking about where like it can be, you know, segmented out and be much more meaningful.
Well, and we were very careful on my moose. Like you were there on my moose, and like I look at those pictures and I'm like, I got Cannon, who's 2 at the time, in his Buzz Lightyear underwear, freaking hanging on an antler, like looking like there was so many pictures that I look back on with fond memories. You know what I mean? And that whole thing was captured. Like how many people were there? How many people came to help me pack it out? And it's like we got this big group photo, and we got my dad and my brother and my son, and it's really cool. Instead of just being like, all right, here's your shitty picture, and let's start cutting. Let's get to work. You know what I mean? It was cool to be able to look back on that. So,
yeah, no, there's a lot of aspects. You know, that I used to. One of my other things with guiding is I would ask permission. Some people wanted to carry it out, an animal, and they were proud. But I said, I'm going to recommend that you let me carry the deer and you walk behind me and you get to savor it all the way out, you know, and you get to see that thing swinging, and you get to I just want you to be like back there and take it
in your brain. Yeah. The only time you get to do it on your back is if the sun's behind you and you can see the shadow, you know?
Yeah. And so little things like that, you know, I think peppering in, you know, like if you get one and someone comes to help pack you out, like my natural inclination is to want to pack my own animal out, or especially the head or whatever, you know, the head and some meat, and somebody else take meat, whatever. But being able to like walk out with your animal on somebody else's back and just sit there and just
I have to try that sometimes. I'm also kind of like, but there is a reward to kind of, especially if it's a grueling pack out. I love sometimes like that like burden of especially a long, you know, like a big elk pack out where you might be doing it over like couple of days or something. Like there's something that I savor in like the pain a little bit. But I've definitely got to try that, because I could definitely see that.
Because it is such a cool view. I've never thought about it.
It would be fun.
Like you've seen other people, not with your animal.
But not with your animal,
like,
you know. So
like as you're saying that swinging back and forth, I remember my wife's big 3x4 she killed. I was like, I'm not packing out the head for you. Like, you got to pack it out. You know, that's kind of the rule. And I distinctly remember that. Like, my beautiful wife walking through the sagebrush with this big buck, like, dancing side to side. And it was super
that's
cool.
a fun. That's a fun.
Yeah.
And so those little things, I think, are part of that experience and savoring that. You know, especially if you get something that you're really proud of and all that, you take it in all those different ways, and cutting it up and sitting there, taking a break and making sure everyone's packed up and not just get the heck out of there and all that. And, you know, I mean, to me, it's like the 1 o'clock get back homes are awesome, you know, but when you could have been out of there 2 hours earlier because you just got down to business, it seems like to me it's like you give that a chance to soak in. And yeah, I don't know, we could carry on about all that stuff, but it just goes back to the experience. Savor the experience.
Absolutely.
No matter what it is, what you're pursuing, don't forget to savor the experience, I think.
That would probably be a great one to end on there. I mean, that is very important. I think that leaves us on a high note. We just have to get to these 4 pages of questions in another podcast. Oh man, I got
high country stuff. Well, you know, I feel bad that we sidestepped the high country, but then again, I don't.
Yeah, I know, but it was cool because that was like an all-encompassing deer podcast. I mean, we did talk about it all. We talked about the high country, winter range, historical, current day.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that, man. Yeah. Really, really fun having you on. Thanks for making the time to do it. I would love to do it again. I think there's all kinds of stuff that I'd like to just explore with you. I think you've got a really interesting perspective on things. You've had interesting experiences. Yeah. So
and you're good at looking internally, which is a very important thing, you know, of just like how you value, what you value, how you value things and the way you view them, which is... That's a rare trait to look internally like that, you know, so.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I love, you know, I mean, the thing that I've found about that, I think it's maybe just my nature, but the one thing that I've felt in sometimes being apprehensive about sharing that stuff, I probably more in the past than I am now, but anytime you open up that door, I feel like it really... It makes it relatable to everybody because we all go through all of that stuff, you know, and I think when we can get real about it and reflect on that, that's where growth happens, and we all desire growth, you know, and so when we can have humility, I think, and kind of process through that stuff, that's what builds wisdom, and that's what applies to everything in our life, and so I think it's important to have that despite not wanting to, you know, because of pride.
Yeah.
You know, so I appreciate your guys' time and being having I feel like we've had a good reciprocal conversation, and I think that's important on these issues to bring all the listeners in to kind of make them feel like they're part of it too.
Yeah, definitely.
No, that was awesome, Cody.
Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, that was good. Like, subscribe, comment, engage with us. We want to go hunt more this fall, so please engage with us. All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Cheers.